Hello, my name's Marjorie. My sister fired me the same week she took over our father's company. No warning, no conversation. Just gone. Like I'd never mattered. But it wasn't just about the job. It was everything that came before it. The silence, the favoritism, the way they smiled to my face while planning my exit behind closed doors. They called her the Golden One. So why was I the only one holding the signature they needed? And if I had stayed quiet, would they have erased me completely? What do you do when your own family treats you like a placeholder? Let me tell you what happened next. It was Sunday morning, and the kitchen smelled like toast and that cinnamon candle I'd forgotten to put out. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Family Board Transition Meeting, Saturday. Saturday, past tense. I blinked at the screen, unsure if it was some glitch. But no, it was real. I hadn't seen the invite, hadn't heard a word. I refreshed my email, checked my spam, even reopened the family group chat. Nothing. I sat still for a moment. A strange kind of quiet crawled up my spine. Not the peaceful kind. No, this was the sound of a door closing, without ever making a sound. How do you miss a meeting you were never told existed? I tapped the mug with my thumbnail, watching the surface ripple. I wasn't sure what bothered me more, the fact that they had met without me, or that no one thought I needed to know. Maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe I was never meant to be there in the first place. The next morning, I got to the office early, as usual. I nodded to the receptionist, who offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something was off. The air was different, thinner maybe. People passed me in the hall, but their eyes skated past mine. Even the intern who used to greet me with "Morning, Ms. Quinn," kept her head down and pretended to be deep in conversation with the vending machine. In the break room, I poured myself a cup of black coffee. Behind me, someone whispered, not low enough. I thought she was already gone. Gone? My badge still opened doors. My name was still on the system. My desk, my files, my team. Everything was still where I left it. But the look in their eyes told a different story. They didn't need to announce it. The silence screamed louder. I headed to the legal floor, pretending I needed a form signed, anything to give my hands something to do. I passed Amanda's desk, the legal assistant, and caught a glimpse of an open folder. The letterhead was unmistakable. Roth Enterprises. The bold typeface, CEO appointment, Clarette Alden. Below it, a signature, Jeremiah Roth. Dated last Friday. That same Friday, I thought we were just having a quiet brunch at Dad's house. Scones, fresh strawberries, small talk about the garden. Turns out, while I was cutting fruit, they were cutting me out. I scanned the document again. My name wasn't listed as part of the transition, not on the advisory list, not in the transitional workflow, not even a courtesy CC. They passed the torch. I just wasn't considered flammable enough to burn. I backed away from Amanda's desk without a word. My fingers tingled like I'd just touched a live wire. I walked to the elevator, each step slower than the last. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Inside, I pressed the button for the ground floor and watched the numbers count down. 13, 12, 11. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even blinking, just breathing in a way that didn't feel like breathing anymore. They chose her. They always do. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I did. From Clarette Alden, subject, Team Realignment Session, Mandatory Attendance Time, Monday, 8 m. sharp. Mandatory. How generous. She hadn't spoken to me in person, hadn't sent a courtesy call, but she made sure to schedule me in. For a realignment. The only thing colder than being forgotten is being summoned, like a ghost, back into the room that erased you. I didn't sleep much that night. The kind of tired I felt didn't come from lack of rest. It came from knowing the morning would ask me to stand in a room that had already decided I didn't belong. I laid out my clothes like I was preparing for trial, not a team meeting. I didn't choose black, too dramatic. I wore navy, structured, Sharp, unapologetic. By the time I pulled into the parking garage, the sun hadn't fully cleared the rooftops. I sat in the car a moment longer than necessary, watching a pair of junior analysts walking in, laughing. Neither of them looked my way. Upstairs, the boardroom lights were already on. Everyone was in their seat, coffee cups placed neatly on the table, folders stacked. Clarette stood at the head of the table, perfectly composed in a fitted blazer I'd seen her wear for photo ops. She didn't glance up when I walked in. No nod, no acknowledgement. I took the empty seat near the end, my usual spot. I didn't need to look around to feel the shift in air. This wasn't a meeting, it was an unveiling. She cleared her throat softly. Before we begin, there are some changes we'll be implementing immediately. No one looked surprised. That's when I knew they already knew. She announced a reshuffle of departments, some roles merged, some made redundant. Then she turned directly toward me. Marjorie, we thank you for your years of service, but we're moving forward with a different structure. Effective today, your role has been absorbed. Absorbed. She said it like it was nothing, like it was an outdated feature being removed from a software update. No explanation, no discussion, just done. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I could feel the eyes in the room bouncing between us, trying to look anywhere but directly at me. One man tapped his pen. Another slowly closed his laptop. The only sound was the distant hum of the AC vent overhead. I nodded once, short, clean, and stood. Back in my office, I didn't find an HR rep waiting. No formal paperwork, just a system-generated termination email sitting in my inbox. I read it twice, then closed it. There was nothing in there I didn't already feel. I began packing without urgency. My things didn't take up much space. A framed photo of my mother and me. A small stack of old client thank you notes I'd kept pinned to a corkboard. The magnolia branch paperweight a client had brought me from Savannah. A few personal books. I reached for the whiteboard behind my desk, covered in notes and flowcharts, then stopped. Let them wipe it. When I walked back out into the hall, it felt quieter than usual, though I knew it probably wasn't. I passed the employee recognition wall. My plaque, Strategic Leader of the Year, was gone. In its place, a fresh new face beamed back at me from a shiny brass frame. Not surprising, just fast. The lobby smelled like polished floors and filtered air. I stepped outside, blinking against the sun. It was warm, the kind of warm that sticks to your skin. I sat in my car, not turning the engine on right away. The building stood behind me, like a closed door I hadn't realized was shutting. No one stood up for me, not one of them. Not even the ones I'd trained. The ones I stayed late for, spoke up for in meetings, shielded from fallout when things went sideways. But I didn't cry. If I meant so little to them, why were they so quick to pretend I was never there? I didn't drive home. I wasn't ready to be alone in that kind of quiet. Instead, I took a turn and headed toward the public park near the river. The one my mother used to love. We'd sat on that same bench when I got my first promotion. She brought iced tea in a thermos, and we watched ducks pick through the grass like they had secrets worth sharing. The bench was still there. The tree hadn't changed. I sat down slowly, the wood warm from the morning sun. I let my shoulders relax for the first time that day. I didn't talk, didn't vent. I just breathed in the scent of river water and fresh-cut grass. After a while, I pulled a small notebook from my bag. Flipping past a few pages, I stopped at a blank one and wrote a single word in the middle. Evidence. Not revenge. Not justice. Just truth. Something to hold when everything else felt like it could be edited out. As I capped the pen, my phone lit up. Lucinda Marks. The name surprised me. It had been over a year since we'd spoken. Lucinda was my mother's estate lawyer, and someone who never called unless something needed protection or exposure. Lucinda didn't leave a voicemail, just her name lighting up on my screen like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I let it go to missed calls, then stared at the log for almost a full minute. She didn't call often, never without cause. I figured whatever reason she had could wait until I'd gathered myself enough to think clearly. The rest of the week passed in a strange mix of inertia and raw clarity. I didn't return to the office. There was no office left for me to return to. But I still had access to the company portal, and for reasons I couldn't explain, maybe force of habit, maybe sheer pride. I logged in each morning just to see what would change next. That's how I found out about the upcoming quarterly presentation. Internal livestream, Friday at 10. My name wasn't on the schedule, obviously, but I knew the deck, knew it down to the order of the slides, because I had built the foundation of that roadmap myself. Friday morning, I walked to the cafe 2 blocks from my building. It had wide windows and a quiet corner seat where the noise never quite reached. I ordered a black coffee and a lemon scone. No cream, no sugar. I set my laptop on the table and connected to the Wi-Fi. I told myself I wouldn't watch, but the window opened on its own, like muscle memory. The Roth Company's logo spun in the corner of the screen. Then Clarette appeared, smooth and polished, in a blazer I recognized from a magazine spread she'd done on modern women in leadership. Her posture was pristine, her voice rehearsed. Thank you for joining us this quarter as we redefine what progress means. The screen behind her shifted to the first slide. Growth Roadmap, 2022. My roadmap, my format. The layout I'd spent late nights refining after budget meetings, the one I'd crafted after interviewing clients personally. But there was no mention of me, no nod to the person who built the bones of the strategy. Instead, she smiled and said, "Our new leadership team has worked hard to rethink legacy systems. Innovation must be bold and collaborative." The next image hit harder. A snapshot of the whiteboard from my old office. My handwriting still visible. I remembered the day it was taken. We'd stayed until after 9 p.m., mapping projections, running calculations. I brought pizza. They brought excuses to leave early. Now, that board was evidence, not of my work, but of Clarette's version of team synergy. I closed the window, not out of anger, just because I couldn't give them the courtesy of watching it all. Later, I found myself driving without destination. I passed by the Roth headquarters, out of habit more than intention. The building looked shinier than I remembered, like someone had wiped away fingerprints and memories in one go. 2 new junior execs were taking a selfie in front of the entrance banner. Bold vision, clear future. No one would believe I ever stood at that lobby greeting partners from overseas, explaining the foundation we built. They'd scrubbed that too. Back at home, I turned off my phone and opened the drawer where I kept a forgotten USB. I had labeled it 2 years ago. MQ Roadmap V1. The original project outline. Every milestone, annotated and logged. Slide drafts, voice notes, handwritten memos scanned in from my desk pad. I stared at the timestamps. I hadn't opened these in months. But there they were. Undeniable. And still, not once had anyone called to ask for input. Not even a, "Hey, do you mind if we build on what you did?" I scrolled through line after line. My name, embedded in drafts. Comments tracked back to my logins. But in the real world, the world that was now visible to investors, clients, and new hires, I was invisible. I sat back in my chair. Eyes closed. Had I made it too easy to erase me? Or had they always been waiting for the moment I let my guard down? Around midnight, I found myself still sitting at the desk, the laptop screen dimmed but open. I hadn't eaten dinner, hadn't checked messages. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to remember, not to hurt, but to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined the years I gave them. The sound of an email arriving pulled me back. Subject line: Clarette Alden recognized as visionary CEO behind company turnaround. Internal newsletter. No CC, no personalization. Just a quote, mine, from last year's town hall, repackaged under her name. I didn't react, just saved the article. You can be erased in public, but still exist in the margins of the truth. I didn't touch the article again after saving it. I just let it sit there, unopened, like a scar that hadn't scabbed over. The weekend stretched out ahead of me, quiet and unfinished. I spent Saturday morning cleaning, not because the place needed it, but because I did. Scrubbing down surfaces made more sense than replaying conversations I'd never be able to change. By the time late afternoon settled in, the windows were throwing amber streaks across the floor. I poured a glass of water, sat down at my desk, and opened my hard drive. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just wanted to feel like I still had pieces of myself archived somewhere. And then, there it was. Folder labeled Kingswell Final Drafts. I hadn't opened it since before Dad stepped down. Inside, a file named Kingswell Draft V3, authorized MQ PDF. I clicked. It opened slowly, like it too was trying to decide whether it should exist. The timestamp? Dated 3 weeks before Clarette's announcement as CEO. The signature page? Marked clearly with my name. Not just as a contributor, but as the sole authorized signatory. A clause buried in the final section cited international jurisdictional protections, assigning me, by name, as the only person legally able to execute the final agreement. They didn't just need a team, they needed me. The roadmap, the forecasts, the translation footnotes, all mine. The deal hadn't closed. It was still in pending status, and according to the protocol I helped establish, they couldn't move forward without me. So while Clarette was busy reinventing the company in her image, she'd overlooked the fact that her crown sat on a document with my name at the bottom. I closed the file and sat back. No smile, no triumph, just breath. They had used my voice, my strategy, my structure. Without realizing the foundation was still under my control, I opened my browser and checked internal communications. No one else had touched the Kingswell deal. No reassignment logged. No new point of contact. It had simply stalled. After a moment, I pulled up an old contact, Amir, a Kingswell representative I'd met over coffee at a trade summit 2 years back. We'd kept our conversations professional, light, and consistent. I drafted a short message. Hi Amir, just checking in to verify who's handling final Kingswell documentation now on your side? His reply came 20 minutes later. We were told you were on an extended medical leave. We've been waiting for a revised signature. No anger, no exclamation, just patience. I didn't reply. Instead, I stepped out onto my small balcony, letting the breeze pull at the corners of the curtain. From up here, the city was quiet. Boats along the river drifted like they had nowhere urgent to be. Across the water, I could just make out the top of the old port office, a building we once pitched to lease for satellite expansion, another idea Clarette had dismissed as too legacy-minded. I stared at the skyline and felt the shift. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want headlines or retribution. I wanted the truth to land exactly where it needed to, not like a grenade, like gravity. They had spent weeks restructuring a future they couldn't legally finalize. All it would take was a signature, and I was the only one allowed to give it. Back inside, I opened the notebook again. The word evidence sat on the top of the page like a heading. Underneath, I wrote, Kingswell Leverage, do not move yet. Amir contact, keep confidential, document timestamp, verified. I underlined the last line twice. Then I stopped, closed the book. Clarette thought she had the kingdom. But the throne? That was still built on paper I never signed. Just before shutting down my screen, a calendar notification popped up. Kingswell Board Review, Thursday, 10 a.m. Still listed. Still active. No one had removed me. I didn't need to announce anything, not yet. Sometimes power wasn't about speaking louder. It was about being the quiet reason the room couldn't move forward. The calendar alert stayed on my screen like it was daring me to ignore it. I didn't. I opened a new browser tab, logged into the company's back-end system, and let myself scroll through what I shouldn't have had access to anymore. That's when I saw it. My name. Still listed as the authorized signatory on the Kingswell contract. Still attached to the deal Clarette claimed was already done. But it wasn't just still active, it was marked completed. I froze. Not in fear, in calculation. I hadn't signed anything. It was late, just past 9 p.m., but I called Amir anyway. He picked up after 2 rings. "Marjorie," he said cautiously, "I wasn't sure I'd hear from you." I didn't waste time. "Did the contract go through?" There was a short pause, the kind that told me the answer would sting. "Technically, yes. We received a copy with your name on it last week, but honestly, we were hoping you'd follow up. Something felt off." "Send me the file," I said. "Please." It hit my inbox 5 minutes later. The document looked official. The formatting was identical to the one I'd drafted. The cover page was intact. Everything was where it should have been. Until I scrolled down to the final page. My signature stared back at me. Not scanned, not digital, handwritten. It looked close, uncomfortably close, but it wasn't mine. And that was the moment everything changed. I printed 3 copies, one for myself, one for legal, one for whoever tried to lie to my face. The next morning, I drove to Dad's house. Not the office, not the park, not some passive email. This needed to happen face to face. He answered the door, wearing that same old cardigan he always kept in the hallway closet. He looked tired. Not aged, just burdened. We sat in the sunroom. He poured coffee for both of us without asking, like we were still in the version of our family where things were civil. I placed the contract on the table. He read the signature first. Then his eyes scanned the clause I'd underlined in red, the one that made it clear I was the only authorized signer. He didn't say anything right away, just adjusted his glasses and leaned back. "I didn't know," he said finally. "No, you didn't ask." He set the paper down gently, like it might bite. "Why would she do this?" he asked. But it was rhetorical, and we both knew it. "She wants to win," I said, "even if it means breaking things she can't rebuild." He looked away. "Maybe you should speak to her directly." "I already did," I said. "She just doesn't realize it yet." Back at home, I sat down at my desk and opened a new email. To General Counsel, subject, unauthorized contract execution, requesting immediate clarification regarding execution of contract Jacques WS Q317, currently listed under my authority. Please confirm who authorized final signature and under what documentation. I hit send. Then I waited. 3 hours later, I received a reply. "We'd like to speak with you directly." No apology, just protocol. It was enough. Later that night, just as I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Clarette. "Clarette, what the hell are you doing?" I stared at the screen for a second, then typed back slowly. "Me. Something you should have done before signing my name." There was no reply. That told me everything. The problem with paper trails is, they don't burn easily. The silence after her text was louder than any reply could have been. I didn't need her to admit it. The forged signature, the cover-up, the arrogance. It was all there, between the lines she didn't send. The next morning started slow, the kind of quiet where even the refrigerator hum felt sharp. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone rang. Not a text, a direct call. Elroy Vance. I hadn't heard from him since the last board dinner I'd been pushed out of without explanation. He never called without a reason, I answered. "Elroy." "Marjorie," he said, voice low, clipped. "I won't waste your time." "Good," I said. "I'm running short on patience." He exhaled, quick and audible. "There's movement. Clarette's been in talks with 2 private buyers. She's pushing through a partial equity release under something called Roth Holdings, East Division Restructure." I went still. That name wasn't new. I had created it, drafted it as a long-range contingency shell for expansion. It was meant to be a tool. She was now using it as a shield. She's using infrastructure I designed. "We figured as much, and she said you're no longer involved. Told the board she had your blessing." "She's lying." "I assumed." Send me everything you have, I said. Time, date, draft language if possible. I'll forward what I can. But I'm telling you now, if she walks into that investor meeting tomorrow with a pitch deck, there will be consequences. They're already nervous. You know how this works. One slip. She's already slipped, I said. She just hasn't hit the floor yet. After the call, I logged in and went digging. My access was limited, but not gone. They'd forgotten to fully revoke back-end clearance to my archives. Rookie mistake. Folders dated 2 nights ago, file names labeled exploratory, a few stamped internal only. She'd been busy. Pitch outlines, valuation ranges, exit scenarios. Nothing approved, nothing disclosed to the full board. Just quiet threads tying everything to a single direction. Hers. I sat back, staring at a slide where my own formatting was still being used, down to the spacing between bullet points. She hadn't just taken the steering wheel. She'd stolen the whole map. I didn't call her, not yet. Instead, I walked to the window, phone in hand, and took a breath. Not shaky, not panicked, just full. Then I dialed. She answered after 4 rings. "What now?" she asked, like I was the inconvenience. "You need to stop." "Excuse me?" "You're stepping into criminal exposure. You're selling pieces of something you don't fully own, using infrastructure you didn't build." There was a pause, then that same syrupy confidence I'd come to recognize over the years. "You were great at building things, Marjorie. I'll give you that. But I'm better at making them valuable." My grip on the phone tightened. "You're not adding value, Clarette. You're cashing in on what someone else bled for." She laughed. "Spare me the martyr act." I didn't respond. I just hung up. No more wasted breath. I returned to my desk, opened a secure folder, and began compiling. It took me less than 30 minutes to organize the proof. I labeled it cleanly. Clear subject lines. Chronological layout. Time-stamped backups. Screenshots of draft files, side by side with originals bearing my initials. Then I encrypted the folder and sent it to 3 places. First, Kingswell Legal. Second, Elroy Vance. Third, a private auditor who once worked for my mother, someone who knew exactly where to look for paper that had been accidentally shredded. The subject line was simple: Foundation Ownership Review, Urgent. The message inside read, "My work has been misused without consent. The attached documents clarify authorship and authority. I'm not seeking a fight. I'm ensuring accuracy." After I hit send, I closed the laptop and leaned back. "She moved first," I said out loud to no one, but I kept the receipts. I didn't plan on doing anything else that night. I'd done my part. If they were going to pretend this was a game, I wanted them to realize they were already playing with loaded dice. My phone buzzed again an hour later. "Elroy. If she shows up tomorrow with a pitch deck, she'll be walking into her own audit." I stared at that message, letting the weight of it settle. When you've built something from scratch, you know exactly where to place the fuse. And when it lights, you don't run. You watch who panics first. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't toss and turn either. I just waited. Waited for something to rise in me. Anger, anxiety, regret. But it didn't come. What I felt instead was the eerie stillness of clarity, like I had finally stopped trying to make people good at being decent. Around 7:45 a.m., while the city outside my window was still waking up, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The preview line simply read, "You should have this before tomorrow." It was from Devin Lee, an intern I once mentored 3 years ago. Back then, he was sharp, curious, and always stayed late to ask questions no one else dared to. I hadn't heard from him since he'd left for another department under Clarette's watch. I opened the message. A voice note, 1 line of text. "This was from the leadership session, recorded a year ago. You deserve to hear it." I sat down, plugged in my headphones, and pressed play. It was unmistakably Clarette. "She's good for optics. Makes Dad feel like he's leaving something behind with her around. That's why I keep her visible. She's stable, and that's useful, until she's not." Laughter followed. Not just hers. At least 3 voices in the room. I recognized one of them. Sam Delaney, now on her advisory board. Someone I personally referred when he was still freelancing 2 years ago. I replayed it. Once for disbelief. Again for confirmation. They didn't just remove me. They'd been planning it. And worse, they'd built their confidence on the assumption that I wouldn't fight back. That I was more useful as a placeholder than a presence. There was no rage, no heartbreak, just stillness. Later that morning, I opened my messages and sent a short note to Nadia, someone I once trusted. We used to share rides after late shifts, joke about boardroom politics, roll our eyes at executives who couldn't remember our names. My message was simple. Still think she's going to fix everything? 3 dots appeared, then vanished. 5 minutes passed. Then, please don't drag me into this. I have a family. That was the moment I stopped expecting anything from anyone still in her orbit. You don't need to be stabbed in the back when everyone's already standing behind you pretending not to see the knife. I closed the chat and walked to my desk. The folder I had built over the last few weeks sat ready. Timestamps, emails, audio, and one very old envelope that Lucinda Marks had dropped off the previous spring. I hadn't opened it back then. I didn't need to. I trusted it would matter when it was time. It was time. The Devon recording was first in the presentation deck, then the Kingswell file with my legal authority. Next, a breakdown of the shell company Clarette had tried to slide past the board, using infrastructure I had personally set up and trademarked. Finally, a copy of the clause from my mother's estate, still sealed, still binding. I didn't want to blow the room up. That would have been easy. I wanted to walk in, lay the facts down, and let the weight of them shift everything she had built with smoke and mirrors. Around 6 p.m., I walked to the park near my apartment, the one my mother loved. I sat at our old bench, beneath the same oak tree, and stared across the river. I thought of her handwriting, the way she signed her name like a woman who didn't need permission. "You're going to have to do this alone, Marjorie," she once told me, "but that doesn't mean you'll be alone forever." I stood, brushed off my coat, and made my way back home. As I walked through my door, a ping echoed from my laptop. I didn't rush to it. I made tea first, then opened the email. Subject: Updated agenda. Kingswell board meeting, 10:00 a.m. Company status update. CEO, Clarette Alden, 10:30 a.m. Independent review session, Marjorie Quinn. There it was. Official. They hadn't removed me. They hadn't dared. Not because they respected me, because they knew I still mattered. Even if they couldn't say it out loud. You can bury someone's name in the agenda, but if they show up in the minutes, it's already too late. I didn't speak a word on the drive to the Kingswell building. There was nothing left to rehearse. I'd already lived it. Every slide, every timestamp, every buried clause. They weren't strategy anymore. They were memory. The air in the boardroom was too still when I walked in. 5 minutes early, and yet somehow, they'd already settled into their chairs like they'd been waiting longer. A few side glances. No one met my eye directly. Except Clarette. She was already seated at the head of the table, wearing that pearl gray suit she always chose for victory days. Her lips curved into a polite line that didn't reach her eyes. Jeremiah sat 2 seats away, his hands folded. He didn't look surprised to see me. Just unreadable. No one said anything as I took my seat. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I simply opened the slim leather folder I'd brought with me and placed it gently on the table. At exactly 10 o'clock, the moderator cleared his throat. "Welcome, everyone. We'll begin with a company update from our CEO, Clarette Alden." Clarette stood and launched into her presentation like it was just another quarterly review. Charts, talking points, polished metaphors. I watched her move through the deck smoothly, efficiently, until she hit the Kingswell slide. Her voice faltered for just a breath. Then she pushed on, highlighting projected revenue shifts and synergistic restructuring. Her phrasing was textbook. Her timing, rushed. I didn't blink. At 10:30, the moderator looked at me. "We'll now hear from Marjorie Quinn regarding review concerns." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I opened the folder and removed a flash drive. Before I speak, I'd like you all to hear something. The room fell still. I played Devon's recording from my phone, hooked through the built-in speaker system. Clarette's voice filled the space. She's good for continuity optics. Dad likes to think she's stable. That's why I keep her visible. Then laughter. I paused the audio before the second half could land harder. Silence. This wasn't a private opinion. This was spoken in a leadership session, attended by several current advisors. I handed printed transcripts down both sides of the table. Then the forged contract. This, I said, is not my handwriting. I passed it alongside the original version, signatures side by side. These are not personal wounds, they're legal violations. The signature on the executed Kingswell deal was not mine, and I have never delegated authority to substitute it. I turned toward Clarette, her face set, jaw tight. And for the record, I continued, the Roth East shell, which was referenced in the investor pitch last week, was built using IP associated with my estate, registered, documented, and protected. No release was ever granted. No one spoke. It wasn't necessary. Then Jeremiah cleared his throat. There are mistakes, he began quietly, that a CEO makes and recovers from. And then there are mistakes a father makes that echo in his daughter's silence. He looked directly at Clarette. You weren't chosen because you were ready. You were chosen because I thought she wouldn't fight back. Then to me, I should have asked more, trusted more, listened more. I'm sorry. I said nothing. But I didn't look away. The moderator looked unsure whether to continue, but before he could speak, the side door opened. Lucinda Marks walked in, a folder in hand. She nodded to me, then addressed the board. This document was drafted by Verity Quinn 5 years ago. It outlines a contingency. Should any attempt be made to dissolve or restructure family assets, a controlling percentage of shares would transfer to Marjorie Quinn. She laid the document flat. 40%, effective immediately. No one interrupted her. Clarette's gaze stayed locked on the table. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. The board voted. It wasn't dramatic. A simple count. Formal, clean. Clarette was suspended, pending legal review. As the room began to clear, I gathered my things slowly. I didn't linger. Didn't need to. But in the hallway, just as I rounded the corner toward the elevator, she stopped me. You think this is over? I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel small standing next to her. It ended the moment you forged my name, I said. Everything since then was just paperwork. She didn't reply. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button. The doors closed quietly between us. Rebuilding doesn't begin with winning. It begins with remembering why you stayed quiet for so long. When the elevator doors opened on the lobby floor, I didn't walk out like someone who had won anything. I walked like someone who had stopped expecting the win to look like applause. A week passed. The kind of week where everything around you continues moving, but you feel like a ghost floating just outside of it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't rush to announce what happened. The only sound I held onto was my own breath. By the following Monday, I returned to the Roth building, not as a guest, not as a relic, not even as a story. I came in because there was work to do. There were no cameras waiting at the front entrance. No press, no board members waiting to shake hands. Just the receptionist who gave me a small nod and said, "Welcome back, Ms. Quinn." It landed softly, like something that had always been true and was finally said out loud. Upstairs, the lights were already on in the transition suite. Someone had placed a folder on my desk labeled Client Strategy, Interim Lead. Inside, files, timelines, access codes. No longer acting, no longer former. I opened the top drawer. My old pen was still there. Not everything had been erased. Around midday, an internal memo circulated, a formal note from the board summarizing the shift. Clarette was listed as suspended pending internal investigation. The wording was measured, no dramatics, but it didn't need drama. Everyone in that building knew what happened. Quiet messages trickled into my inbox. Glad you're back. You handled it better than most would have. Thanks for showing what restraint looks like. No apologies. No ownership from the ones who sat silent while I was gutted from the inside out. But something in their tone was different. Like they were writing to someone who had survived something they hadn't expected her to survive. I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't need to. They'd seen what they needed to see. Later that afternoon, Jeremiah came to my office, alone, no assistant trailing behind him, no prepared speech, just him, holding a small envelope. He placed it on the desk without sitting. It was in your mother's things, he said. She asked me to give it to you if things ever got too far. I nodded once. Then he lingered, like he might say more. But he didn't. He left the way people do when they know they've said too little, too late. I waited a long while before opening the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My mother's handwriting filled it in blue ink, steady and elegant. If this ever lands in your hands, it read, I trust you'll know what to do with the weight I couldn't carry. You always had a stronger back than I did. I'm sorry I didn't say that out loud. I folded the note and slid it into the notebook where I'd once written evidence. It no longer felt like proof. It felt like closure she never got to deliver. Before heading home, I walked out through the courtyard. The building buzzed behind me, people rushing meetings, voices bouncing down hallways. But outside, it was still. I took the longer path past the east side of the property, near the garden my mother used to tend. I hadn't been there since she passed. I didn't expect much, but the magnolias were blooming, early and full. I crouched beside the one she planted the year I turned 20, ran my hand along a leaf. You kept it going longer than anyone gave you credit for, I whispered. I guess I did too. I stood, brushed the dirt from my hands, and exhaled. Not in grief, in recognition. The story wasn't over, but the chapter was closed. I didn't smile, but I didn't flinch either. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer owned my name. Sometimes you don't win with noise. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to stay steady, gather the truth, and let it speak for you. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that being underestimated isn't always a weakness. It's often a gift. It gives you space to move quietly, to build quietly, and when the time comes, to rise without needing permission. To anyone out there who's ever been overlooked, erased, or told to be grateful for being included, let me tell you this. Your presence is not a favor, it's a foundation. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they're more comfortable without your voice. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, only to realize it cost you more than your voice? Or maybe you were the one who finally stood up when nobody else did. Let's talk about it. If this story moved you, even just a little, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if it didn't sit right with you, I still want to hear why. Your voice matters here. And if you'd like more real, honest stories like this, stories that reflect the grit, grace, and quiet strength of everyday people, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for the next one. Because out here, we don't just tell stories. We remember who we are and why that still matters.
Hello, my name is Odessa, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been the one they pushed aside. I never thought it would come to this. My sister swapping my heart medication with poison. I collapsed in the kitchen, ended up in the ICU, and when the blood tests exposed the truth, my parents, they hissed, "Say it's an accident. Don't fuss. She was joking." But it wasn't a joke. It never was. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the cops walked in. Why would they do this to me? What have I done to deserve this kind of betrayal? Stay with me, because the truth, my truth, is something you won't believe. I knew something was wrong the moment I opened my medicine box that morning. The pills looked different, a shade lighter, more opaque than usual. At first, I chalked it up to the pharmacy switching to a new generic brand, a minor oversight that could be easily explained. But something nagged at me, as if my gut was trying to tell me something that my mind wasn't ready to process. Still, I swallowed the suspicion down, just like I had so many times before. It had been a long, slow process, learning how to ignore the whispers of doubt in my head. Working in home care, I was no stranger to taking medicine. I was meticulous about it, careful, because I had no choice. I couldn't risk missing a dose. The pills I took every day were more than just part of a routine. They were my lifeline, the only thing keeping my heart from giving out. But today, with the pills sitting in the palm of my hand, I hesitated. The ones I usually took were a rich, deep blue, smooth like polished stones. These were different. I stared at them for a moment longer than I should have before I popped one into my mouth and chased it down with water. Maybe it's a generic brand, I thought. Maybe I'm just overthinking again. Like they always say, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting for something, anything to happen, but nothing did. So I just shook my head and pushed it from my mind. Maybe I was being paranoid, or maybe deep down, I was just tired of always feeling like the problem. I was tired of second-guessing myself. The day dragged on. I went about my usual routine, made some calls for work, ate lunch alone in the kitchen, and started to get ready for my mom's birthday brunch. She was turning 60 today. It wasn't just another birthday, it was a milestone, and the family would be gathering at the same old family-owned restaurant where we always celebrated, where the air was thick with the scent of freshly baked bread and spilled wine. It was all a blur when I arrived. The room was alive with the usual chatter, the clinking of silverware, and the awkwardness that came from years of unspoken tension. My mother was already seated at the head of the table, basking in the spotlight as usual. My sister, Seraphine, was glowing, of course. She always did. It was impossible not to notice. She was the perfect picture of grace, elegant, composed, flawless, as if everything she touched turned to gold. It's like she lived in a world where no one could see the cracks. She wasn't the problem. I was. "Odessa, sweetheart," my mother called over to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Come on, sit down. Let's not keep everyone waiting." I smiled weakly, though I wasn't sure if anyone could see the faint shadow that hung over me. The dizziness from earlier hadn't quite passed. My chest was tight, my hands shaking just a bit. But no one would notice that. No one was ever looking at me long enough to see. "Let her sit by me," Seraphine cooed, pushing out the chair beside her. "Mom's right. We can't have you hiding over there in the corner." I sat down carefully, placing my hands in my lap. I wasn't sure if it was the headache or the overwhelming feeling of being invisible, but I felt out of place, like I didn't belong in the family photo anymore. Seraphine leaned in, her eyes scanning the room as she spoke in a voice that was just a little too sweet. "It's so good to have everyone together again, right? You know, I think this year will be the best yet." I nodded, even though I couldn't bring myself to believe her. Everything always seemed perfect from where she sat, but from my seat, it was a different story. "Just try not to bring the mood down, okay?" My mother's words floated over to me, casual, but they stung all the same. I froze for a second, then forced a smile. "Of course, Mom." Lorraine, my mother, caught my eye for a split second before looking away, returning to the conversation with Seraphine. "Let your sister shine today. You've had enough attention with your hospital visits." The words hit harder than I expected, sinking deep into the pit of my stomach. I had always been the one to draw attention, but never for the right reasons. I was always the sick one, the one who needed everyone's attention, and I hated it. I hated how easily they dismissed me, how easily they let me fall out of focus when it wasn't convenient. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just let it go, like I always did. The brunch continued, but I felt as if I was watching it through a foggy window. Every word from my family felt distant, every laugh too loud. Seraphine's radiant smile seemed to reflect the light that I could never quite catch. As I tried to focus on the conversation, my vision started to blur again. I rubbed my eyes, but it didn't help. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, faster than it should. The familiar feeling crept up my spine, the one I'd learned to live with since I was a kid. I excused myself from the table, hoping no one would notice the tremor in my hands. "Where are you going?"
Seraphine called after me, but I didn't answer. I walked out to the parking lot, my chest tightening with every step, the cool breeze offering little relief. I fumbled through my purse for my medication strip, my fingers unsteady as I pulled it out. The pills were still there, staring back at me, but they looked different again under the dim light of the car. They weren't the same color, not the same shape. I pulled out one pill and stared at it in my palm for a long time, the weight of it sinking in. This was wrong. I wasn't imagining things. But still, I wasn't sure what to do with the thought. Maybe it's nothing, I told myself, even as the doubt gnawed at me. Maybe I'm overreacting. It could be a mistake. Just like they always say, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. But this time, something inside me felt different. The little voice in the back of my head was louder than usual. I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I shoved the pill strip back into my purse, my eyes narrowing as I stared out the windshield. Just in case I'm not crazy. I woke up that morning with an odd feeling, something I couldn't quite shake off. My body felt heavy, my limbs sluggish, as if the weight of the world had settled on top of me during the night. But I had learned long ago to push through. That's what I did. What I always did. I didn't have the luxury of dwelling on feelings. I had too many responsibilities, too many things to do. After taking a deep breath, I rolled out of bed and headed to the kitchen. The smell of coffee brewing in the corner perked me up, but not by much. I grabbed the cereal box off the counter, poured myself a bowl, and tried to make the most of a slow morning. As I sat down at the table, I looked at my heart medication bottle. It was sitting there, just like every other day, a steady part of my routine. I pulled out the bottle and popped the cap. The pills inside looked slightly different than I remembered. They were a bit more opaque, not as vibrant as they usually were. I didn't think too much of it at first. Maybe I was just overthinking it. I was tired. I'd had a long week, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, doubt crept in. Maybe this was a generic version, I reasoned. Maybe the pharmacy had changed the brand. It wasn't uncommon. I popped the pill into my mouth, swallowed it, and took a sip of water. The minutes ticked by, but the tightness in my chest only worsened. My heart was beating louder now, thumping in my ears. I stood up to go to the sink, but the room began to spin around me. My vision blurred, and the faint dizziness I'd been ignoring flared up into something much worse. I grabbed the counter to steady myself, but the buzzing in my head intensified. Panic rose in my chest as I stumbled toward the kitchen table, knocking the glass of water over as I tried to steady myself. I heard it hit the floor, but it felt distant, as if I were underwater. Come on, pull it together, I thought. Just breathe. But it wasn't working. I was sinking. I managed to catch a glimpse of Seraphine entering the room. She looked over at me, standing there, my body swaying. But instead of rushing to help, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, her face lighting up with the familiar glow of an Instagram story being recorded. Just another day with drama in the background, she said, her voice casual, like she was filming a reality show. A light chuckle escaped her, as if she found some twisted humor in the situation. She didn't even seem to care. I collapsed. My vision went black, and for a moment, all I could hear was the rapid thumping of my heart, pounding louder than the sound of my body hitting the ground. The dizziness, the confusion, the disbelief, it was all too much. As I lay there, helpless, all I could think was, why? Why is this happening? When I finally came to, I was in the ICU, the soft beeping of machines filling my ears, the sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with the cold air, and I blinked, trying to clear my foggy mind. My mother, Lorraine, was sitting beside me, her hand holding mine in a tight grip. "Mom?" My voice was barely a whisper. I could barely remember how I got here, or what happened before. "Oh, sweetie, thank God you're awake," she said, her voice cracking, but there was something forced about it, too much like she was trying to convince herself. Dr. Boone, my cardiologist, was standing nearby, looking at the screen, his face unreadable. "We need to run some toxicology tests," he said. His tone wasn't alarming, but I could tell by the way he paused that this was serious. I turned my head slightly, noticing Seraphine sitting quietly in the corner. And she was crying, but her tears were soft,
controlled. Too controlled. The moment seemed hollow, empty. And then there was the detective, Detective Juno, standing just outside the door, watching. He didn't speak, but his presence was like a quiet storm, hinting at something I wasn't ready to face. I felt like I was floating in the space between worlds, my body heavy and my mind racing. What had happened? Why didn't Seraphine help me? Why didn't anyone? Later that evening, after I'd been hooked up to more machines than I could count, Lorraine leaned in close, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Say it was an accident," she said urgently, her fingers pressing into my palm like a plea. "You don't want Seraphine's career ruined over a misunderstanding." The words tasted sour in my mouth, as if I had bitten down on a rotten fruit. Career? What about my life? Seraphine, sitting on the other side of the bed, wiped her eyes with a tissue and looked at me. "It was just a joke, Desi. You're not seriously going to make this a thing, are you?" Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. I wanted to scream, to call her out on her lies, but I couldn't. My body was too weak, my voice barely a whisper. I stared at the IV drip, the heart monitor beeping steadily, a sound that felt like the only real thing left in the room. My gaze shifted to the medication strip in my purse, still there, still taunting me. The same pills, but now I knew. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't pretend anymore. No more pretending. The days in the ICU felt endless, and yet every moment dragged by as if time was determined to slow down for me. The beeping of the monitors became a rhythmic reminder that my heart was still beating, that I hadn't slipped away while I was unconscious, though at times I felt as though I were. The doctor came and went, checking on me occasionally, his face unreadable. No one knew what had really happened, but the testing was going to give them answers. I knew it would, but I still wasn't sure I wanted to know. The medication they started giving me was different from the usual pills. The colors were bright and reassuring in their familiarity, but nothing would erase the image of that generic bottle, the new pills I had taken before I collapsed, those pills that might have been the very reason I was lying here, powerless. I thought back to the night of the incident. It wasn't lost on me that, for all the concern my family tried to show, their attention had been superficial. The whispers of, "Just another hospital visit," or "Don't make a scene, Odessa," still hung in the air, like they were meant to remind me of my place. They didn't know me. They never really did. And now, as I lay in that sterile hospital bed, I began to wonder if they ever would. The days dragged on with little change. My body was recovering, but my mind, it was anything but still. Every minute felt like it was spent trying to piece together the truth, trying to figure out what had happened that morning and why no one had seemed to care. And then, one afternoon, Seraphine walked in. I knew she was coming. I could sense it, the way her footsteps echoed down the hall, the way the air seemed to shift when she entered the room. She had always had that effect on me, making everything feel like it revolved around her. She didn't even have to try. It was just natural for her. "Here," she said, placing a bouquet of flowers on the bedside table with a gentle thud. The smile on her face was as perfect as ever, her posture poised and elegant, as if she'd just come from an art gallery opening rather than a family hospital visit. I glanced at the flowers, bright lilies, fresh-cut daisies, pretty enough to be part of a staged photo, but they did nothing for me. "I'm glad to see you're awake, Odessa," she said, as if she were simply remarking on the weather, her tone light and casual. "You always were the dramatic one, huh?" I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I wasn't interested in hearing her version of things. I wasn't interested in hearing her shallow words about how sorry she was for what had happened. I wasn't interested in her empty gestures anymore. Seraphine didn't seem bothered by my silence. She just continued with her act, a performance she had perfected over the years. She stayed there for a while, talking about how chaotic life had been and how difficult it was to juggle everything. All the while, I was trapped in my thoughts, battling the urge to scream. How could she talk about chaos when she wasn't the one who had almost died? How could she talk about difficulty when she had no idea what it was like to be dismissed for something that was beyond your control? Finally, she stood, straightened her dress, and picked up her phone, already setting up her next Instagram story. I'll leave you to rest, Desi. Get well soon, she said with a quick peck on my forehead. She turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Before she left, she slid a card into my hand. I opened it, feeling a sense of indifference as I read the message. Let's not make this a circus. I stared at the card for a moment, my fingers trembling. The words weren't just a dismissal. They were a reminder that Seraphine always expected to be in control, to keep everything perfect and clean. If I made noise, if I made this something bigger than it was, I would ruin her facade. I would ruin her carefully crafted world. The tears that had been held back for so long finally began to well up, but I didn't let them fall. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Not again. Later that day, after Seraphine had left, I lay there thinking, remembering things from the past, things I had tried to forget. I remembered that summer when I was 17. I had fainted from the heat while we were on vacation. It was supposed to be a fun trip, a break from the hospital visits, but I had gotten sick. I wasn't allowed to go to the beach that day. I had to stay in the hotel room with my mother, who wasn't exactly a comforting presence. Seraphine had been the star of the day, as usual. She had gone on and on about how she had to wear her new swimsuit because someone had to look good while the rest of us were just pretending to have fun. I hadn't even realized how much that had hurt me until now. My mother had just nodded, agreeing that Seraphine was right. That pattern had never changed. Seraphine's success, her beauty, her ability to charm everyone, she could do no wrong, and I was always the afterthought. Shaking my head, I turned my attention back to the task at hand, finding out the truth about the pills. My body may have been recovering, but my mind was still racing. I reached for my purse and pulled out the pill strip, carefully inspecting it. It didn't feel real. These weren't my usual pills. I grabbed my phone and Googled the pill imprint. I could feel the pit in my stomach grow larger as the results loaded on the screen. These weren't heart medication. These were calming supplements, the kind you could buy over the counter for stress relief. I felt the world around me tilt. No, this can't be real. But it was. The evidence was right there in front of me. I walked to the door and found Lorraine, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Mom," I said quietly, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "The pills. They weren't the ones I was prescribed. There's something else." She barely looked up, her voice distracted. "You're overanalyzing again, Odessa. They're just pills." Just pills. I could feel the weight of the words crash over me, but I didn't have the energy to fight it anymore. They didn't get it. None of them ever had. I had to know the truth. And if no one else was going to believe me, I would have to find it on my own. That night, as I lay there in bed, I called Seraphine on speakerphone. Nadine was sitting next to me, listening quietly. "Did you touch my medication?" I asked softly, keeping my voice steady. Seraphine let out a short laugh, as if I'd just told a joke. "You're welcome for managing your mess, Desi. Don't forget who always cleans up after you." Her words cut through me, deeper than I wanted to admit. She wasn't sorry, not at all. And I realized then that I wasn't going to get the truth from her. She would lie, just like always. Before I could say anything more, Lorraine stormed into the room, her face flushed with anger. "You will not attack your sister after everything she's done for you," she yelled, the words hitting me like a slap. But I wasn't going to back down anymore. I wasn't going to stay silent. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the phone, the silence between us growing louder. I was done pretending. I had to fight for the truth now. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating in its silence. The days that followed the confrontation were full of tension, but little relief. I had expected them to at least try to apologize, or maybe even show a shred of concern. But instead, it was as if nothing had happened at all. I was trapped in my own thoughts, struggling to put the pieces together. I kept coming back to that moment when I had asked Seraphine if she had touched my medication. I couldn't shake the way she had dismissed me so easily, like I was just another one of her problems to ignore, the way her voice had turned cold, calculating. "You're welcome for managing your mess," she had said. I wasn't crazy, I knew that. But why did no one else seem to care? The next morning, Lorraine came to visit me at the hospital. She was holding a gift bag, her face unreadable. I brought you something, she said, setting it on the bedside table before sitting down beside me. Her voice was softer than usual, as if trying to be gentle with me. It's something that belonged to your grandmother. I thought you might want it. She pulled out a vintage necklace, a beautiful, intricate piece that had been passed down through the family for generations. It shimmered in the light, delicate and heavy at the same time. She placed it around my neck, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted it. I've kept this for you, sweetie, she said, her voice almost pleading. But you need to stop making a scene. You're upsetting everyone. I didn't speak right away. The weight of the necklace felt like the weight of my family's expectations pressing down on me. How many times had I been told to keep quiet, to just let things go? How many times had I sacrificed my own well-being to keep the peace? I won't make a scene, I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. But I'm not going to stay silent anymore. Lorraine's expression hardened. She didn't say anything else. She just stared at me, a frown creasing her brow as she stood up and left the room without another word. It wasn't a surprise. Lorraine had always been the one to sweep things under the rug, to make everything seem perfect on the surface. She couldn't handle the messiness of real life, the rawness of emotions and truth. But I wasn't going to let it slide anymore. Not this time. After she left, I found myself staring at the necklace in the mirror. The delicate gold chain glinted back at me, and for the first time, I didn't feel the slightest bit of comfort from it. It was just another tool to keep me in line, to remind me of my place in this family. I needed answers. I needed to know the truth about what had happened with my medication, and I wasn't going to wait around for them to give it to me. That afternoon, I picked up the phone and called the pharmacy. After a few minutes of waiting, a clerk finally picked up. "How can I help you?" I tried to keep my voice calm, but inside, my heart was racing. I need to know if there's any record of my prescription being changed recently, specifically, my heart medication. The pause on the other end felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke. "Ma'am, I can confirm that your prescription was changed. The original medication was swapped without your authorization, and the new pills were filled by a different supplier." My stomach churned. "Are you telling me that someone tampered with my prescription?" "I'm afraid so. The records show that it was processed through a different pharmacy, but we have no record of any changes being authorized by you." I sat there, staring at the phone, my fingers trembling. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. I hung up, my mind racing. I had proof. I had proof that someone had tampered with my medication. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to take this to Dr. Boone. I called his office immediately. After a few rings, his voice came on the line. "Dr. Boone," he said, his tone businesslike. "Dr. Boone, I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found out that my medication was swapped, and I'm pretty sure my hospital records have been tampered with too." There was a long pause on the other end. "I don't know what you're talking about, Odessa," he said, his voice hesitant. "I don't think there's been any issue with your records. I'm telling you, there's something wrong. And if something happens to me again, I'll be coming for you too." He was quiet for a moment before sighing. "I'll look into it. But you need to understand that this is a complicated situation. We can't just—" "I won't be silenced anymore," I cut him off. "This ends now." The conversation ended there, but I could feel the weight of it settle into my chest. This wasn't just about the medication. This was about everything I had endured over the years, my family's denial, the constant dismissal of my pain, the manipulation that had been a part of my life for as long as I could remember. Later that night, we sat down for dinner, and I decided it was time to confront them all. I wasn't going to wait any longer. Lorraine, Seraphine, and even Nadine were gathered around the table, eating quietly, almost too quietly. They knew I had something to say. I placed my fork down, my hands shaking slightly as I looked around the table. "You tampered with my medication," I said, my voice low but firm. "I know the truth, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Seraphine's face went pale. Lorraine's expression remained as cold as ever. Nadine, sitting next to me, didn't say a word. "Odessa," Lorraine said, her voice sharp. "You're overreacting.
This is a family issue. Let it go. Seraphine sighed dramatically, looking down at her plate. You've always had these issues, Odessa, but you're so selfish. The words stung, but I refused to back down. I'm not the one who's selfish, I said, my voice steady now. I'm the one who's been manipulated my entire life, and I'm done with it. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. You're making things worse than they are. You should be grateful for everything we've done for you. I stood up from the table, my heart pounding. No more. I will not stay silent anymore. Later that night, I made the decision to take action. I reached out to a lawyer, someone I knew could help me get the truth out. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was done letting them control the narrative. As I sat down to write the first letter, my phone buzzed. It was a call from my lawyer. We've found something, he said. More tampering with the hospital records. But there's more. A confession. The air in the room felt thick, and I knew something was about to change. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I sat there in the quiet of my hospital room, staring at the phone in my hand. My breath caught in my throat as I read the message. I have information about Seraphine's plan. It's worse than you think. I had hoped for an answer, for something that would explain it all, but I wasn't ready for this. The weight of those words pressed down on me, squeezing the air out of my lungs. What had Seraphine done? How far had she gone? I didn't have time to dwell on it. There were bigger things at stake now. I had already spent too long letting others control the narrative of my life. It was time for me to fight back, for me to take control of my own story. The first step was confronting her, something I had avoided for years. But I wasn't that person anymore. The quiet, submissive girl who let everyone walk all over her. That afternoon, Seraphine came to visit me. She walked into the room with a smile plastered on her face, holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a card in the other. The same card she always handed me when she thought she could make everything better with a little gesture of affection. You always were the dramatic one, huh? She said, sitting down beside me without waiting for me to speak. Her words hit me like a slap. For the first time, I realized the full extent of her manipulations. She was always in control, always turning everything back on me, making me feel like I was the problem. But not anymore. I wasn't going to let her control me any longer. I remained silent, my gaze fixed on her as she babbled on about how much she cared and how everything would be fine. I let her continue for a few minutes until finally I couldn't hold it in anymore. Is that really how you feel, Seraphine? I asked quietly, my voice steady. Do you really think I'm the dramatic one? She looked at me, puzzled. What do you mean? You've been manipulating me my whole life, I said, my voice growing louder. Every time something went wrong, you made it my fault. Every time I struggled, you turned it into something for you to benefit from. Her face twisted in confusion, and I saw the flicker of something in her eyes, something I had never noticed before. It was fear, real fear. For the first time, Seraphine wasn't in control. I didn't mean for you to suffer, she said, her voice shaking. But I wanted the attention. I wanted people to stop feeling sorry for you. My heart dropped into my stomach. The truth, raw and ugly, was finally out in the open. It wasn't just about the medication. It was about everything, about years of being ignored, belittled, and discarded by the person who was supposed to be my closest ally. You don't get to take that from me anymore, I said, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. You don't get to make me the villain in your story. I turned away from her, feeling a lump form in my throat. The emotional weight of it all was crushing, but I wasn't going to cry. Not this time. Later that evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't let this go any longer. I started by gathering the evidence, phone calls, hospital records, anything that could prove what had happened. The evidence was damning, and the more I uncovered, the clearer it became. My family had been covering up the truth for years. I called the pharmacy to confirm what I already suspected. They confirmed that my medication had been switched, that someone had changed the prescription without my consent. They also confirmed that the records had been altered. The phone call was a turning point. I could feel the anger building inside me, but I couldn't stop now. I had to do something with this information. I took a deep breath and dialed Dr. Boone's number. When he picked up, I didn't waste any time. "Dr. Boone, I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know about the tampered records, the switched medication. I know everything." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Odessa," he said finally, his voice hesitant. "This isn't something we can just—" "Don't you dare try to downplay this," I interrupted. "If something happens to me again, I'm coming for you too." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone. I had never felt more powerful, more in control. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I stopped letting them make the decisions for me. That night, I sat down with Lorraine and Seraphine at the dinner table. Yet I was ready to confront them once and for all. "Do you know what's going on with me?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Do you know what's happening to my life? You've been covering it up for years." Lorraine didn't look at me. She didn't even seem to hear me. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," she said, waving me off. "It's just a mistake, a misunderstanding." I felt my chest tighten, the frustration bubbling up. "This isn't a misunderstanding. You're covering for Seraphine. You've always covered for her." Seraphine, ever the perfect picture of composure, looked at me with feigned innocence. "You're just being dramatic," she said. "You always are." I shook my head, my fists clenching on the table. "I'm done with being the scapegoat," I said, my voice low. "I'm done being the problem in your eyes. I've spent my whole life trying to please you, but I'm not doing it anymore." Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this, Odessa." "Maybe I will," I said, standing up. "But I'm already regretting every day I spent pretending everything was okay." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, I felt like I was finally free from their hold, but I knew the road ahead would be long. The next morning, I reached out to a lawyer. I was done being silenced. I had enough evidence, enough strength to fight back. The lawyer's office called me a few hours later. "We've found more," he said. "There's more tampering with the hospital records, but there's more. A confession." The words hit me like a freight train. A confession. It was happening. The truth was coming out. I looked at the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. The final blow was coming. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My heart raced with each passing second. This was it, the moment I had been building up to, preparing for. I wasn't about to let fear or hesitation hold me back any longer. I had gathered every shred of evidence, every recording, every statement, every altered record. There was no turning back now. I clicked send, submitting all the gathered information to the authorities and my lawyer. The weight of it settled in my chest like a stone. My decision had been made. The truth would finally come to light, no matter the cost. I sat back in my chair, feeling the rush of adrenaline followed by a strange calm. The fight was no longer in the shadows. It was in the open now. The world would see what I had been forced to endure for so long. It was time for Seraphine to face the consequences of her actions. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and anxious waiting. But in the back of my mind, I knew Seraphine wouldn't just sit idly by. She would retaliate, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. I wasn't wrong. The first message came late one night, just as I was about to fall asleep. It was from Seraphine. "If you don't drop this, you'll ruin the family name for good. I won't let you do this to us. Think about what you're doing." I read the message several times, trying to make sense of it. The cold threat was unmistakable. She wasn't concerned about me. She was concerned about her own reputation, her own life. I sent a simple reply. "I'm not backing down." The next day, at the family meeting, the tension was unbearable. The usual pretense of civility was gone. Seraphine tried to gaslight me again, turning the situation back on me as if I were the one causing all this chaos. "This is all just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice oozing with fake sweetness. "You're making a fool of yourself, Odessa." I felt the bile rise in my throat, but I held it in. I was done letting her manipulate me. "No," I said firmly, looking her straight in the eye. "This is not a misunderstanding. You've been lying to everyone, and I'm done pretending I don't see it." Lorraine's face twisted in frustration. You don't know what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart. I stood up, feeling the weight of the truth settle over me like armor. You know what? If tearing this family apart means exposing the lies, then so be it, I snapped. Because I am done being your scapegoat. I'm done with your silence. I'm done with your manipulation. Seraphine's expression faltered for a moment, and I saw something I had never seen before: vulnerability. But it quickly morphed into rage. She stood up, throwing her hands in the air in exasperation. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. I didn't flinch. No, I said, my voice calm but unwavering. I won't. Later that evening, I received a call from my lawyer. I had been waiting for this moment, the moment when everything I had worked for would come to fruition. We've gathered more evidence, the lawyer said. We've found tampered records and a statement from a pharmacy worker about Seraphine's involvement. This is more than we expected. The relief I felt was overwhelming. For so long, I had wondered if anyone would believe me, if anyone would take me seriously. But now, with this new evidence, it felt like I was finally getting the justice I deserved. I knew it, I said quietly, more to myself than to the lawyer. I knew it wasn't just in my head. The weight of the burden I had been carrying for so long started to lighten, but I knew this was only the beginning. Seraphine wouldn't go down easily. I couldn't let my guard down now. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, phone calls, and strategy meetings. My family tried to distance themselves from me even more, and Seraphine continued her attempts to control the narrative. But I wasn't backing down. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when I received another message. This one, however, was different. It wasn't from Seraphine. The message was from an anonymous source. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it. I know exactly what Seraphine did, it read. And I have proof. The final piece is here. I stared at the words for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. The final piece? What did that mean? Who was this person, and what did they know? I quickly typed back. Who are you? What do you have? The response came almost instantly. Meet me in the parking lot of the old warehouse on 5th and Main, 6 p.m. You'll get the proof you need. My stomach turned with a mix of anticipation and dread. Was this a trap? Or was this the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I could finally expose everything? I didn't hesitate. I was going to find out the truth. No more playing it safe. No more silence. I got into my car and drove to the warehouse. As I approached the desolate building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to cross a line I could never come back from. I parked the car, my fingers gripping the steering wheel as I looked around. The darkness of the night settled in, and the only sound was the faint hum of distant traffic. Then I saw a figure step out of the shadows. It was a man, wearing a hooded jacket. He walked towards my car with deliberate steps, and I rolled down the window. He didn't speak at first, just handed me an envelope. I opened it quickly, my heart pounding. Inside was a set of photos. Photos of Seraphine, photos of her with someone I didn't recognize, meeting secretly with someone from the pharmacy. The photos were clear, damning evidence of her deceit. This is all the proof you need, the man said, his voice low. Now you can finish this. I stared at the photos, my hands shaking as I realized just how deep the conspiracy ran. This wasn't just about the medication. It was about power, control, and greed. And Seraphine had used everything, including our family, to get what she wanted. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't know what this means. The man nodded, stepping back into the shadows before disappearing into the night. I sat there for a moment, processing everything. I had the proof now. The final piece was here, and I wasn't going to stop until Seraphine paid for everything she had done. I sat there, staring at the message on my phone, my heart racing with every word that flashed across the screen. It felt like a weight lifted off my chest, but it also made the path ahead even clearer. No more turning back. This was the moment. The endgame was in sight. Seraphine's desperate little video had gone viral, just like I knew it would. It was a calculated attempt to manipulate, to play the victim. Her face, smeared with tears, claimed that she never meant to hurt anyone, that all she wanted was to be loved,
to be seen as someone who always stood by me. She even had the nerve to say, "I've always been there for my sister, but she's accusing me of things I never did." She framed herself as the martyr in this twisted family drama. I watched the video from the comfort of my kitchen, my hands trembling as I gripped my phone. The anger bubbled inside me, but it was different this time. It wasn't the kind of rage that blinded me. No, it was cold and sharp, focused. I had seen her lies for so long that now her act barely even fazed me. "This is your last game," I muttered under my breath. "You're done now." I set my phone down with a slam and took a deep breath. I wasn't just going to let her destroy my life any longer. This was it. The truth would come out, no matter how many lies she threw at me. The trial was the next step. The real battle. The following morning, I was in court, standing tall in front of everyone who had ever doubted me. The room was packed, and every eye seemed to be focused on me. The weight of the moment hit me again, but this time it was different. This wasn't just about proving my point to my family. It was about securing justice for all the pain I had endured. The doors to the courtroom opened, and Nadine walked in. She had agreed to testify on my behalf. This was the breakthrough I needed. As she took the stand, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth would finally be enough to bring the darkness to light. "Nadine, can you please tell the court what you know about the events leading up to Odessa's collapse?" the attorney asked, his voice calm but firm. Nadine took a deep breath, her hands steady. She had been through this kind of thing before, but I could tell she still felt the weight of it. She was doing this for me, for us. "I've known Odessa for years," Nadine began. "She came to me more than once about her episodes. The dizziness, the nausea, the confusion. At first, I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew something wasn't right. And when she started telling me about the medication, that's when it all clicked. I was there when Seraphine gave her those pills. I knew they weren't right." The courtroom went silent as Nadine recounted the moments I had only whispered to her. She spoke with clarity, without hesitation, about the signs she had noticed. She confirmed my fears, the manipulation, the tampering, the deliberate attempts to undermine me. Seraphine and Lorraine sat at the other end of the room, their faces masks of feigned disbelief. Seraphine's eyes flickered toward me, her expression filled with loathing. I met her gaze without flinching. The truth was out. She couldn't hide behind her mask any longer. "Thank you, Nadine," the lawyer said, his voice low, but I could see the relief in his eyes. It wasn't over yet, but this was a crucial step forward. Nadine's testimony wasn't the end, though. It was the beginning of everything that followed. As the session continued, I watched Seraphine squirm in her seat. Her perfect act was falling apart in front of her, and she knew it. She had spent years controlling the narrative, but now the truth was unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "You can't control this anymore," I whispered to myself, watching her every move. Seraphine's eyes burned with anger as she glared at me from the witness stand, but I didn't look away. She could try to manipulate me all she wanted, but I was stronger than that now. The fight was out in the open. No more secrets, no more silence. And then, she lost it. In the middle of the court proceedings, Seraphine snapped. She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You ruined everything!" she screamed at me. "This was supposed to be my life. You don't get to destroy me." The judge called for order, his gavel striking the air with a sharp thud. The room fell into chaos as Seraphine's anger erupted, but I wasn't shaken. Not anymore. I stood up slowly, my eyes locked on hers, my voice steady and clear. "I'm not destroying you," I said. "I'm exposing you." The room was deathly silent for a moment. Even Seraphine seemed stunned by my calmness, but I knew I was right. For once, I wasn't the one in the shadows. The truth was my ally. The judge called for a break, but I didn't need one. This was the turning point. My family couldn't hide anymore. The truth had come out, and there was no going back. Later that evening, as I sat in the quiet of my office, my phone rang.
It was my lawyer. "We have the final piece of evidence," he said, his voice grave. "It's about Seraphine's pharmacy contact. This could be the nail in her coffin." I leaned back in my chair, a rush of relief flooding through me. Finally, it was almost over. The last piece was in place. The battle for my life, my future, was nearing its end. I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't. Not now. The phone call ended, and I sat there, letting the weight of it all sink in. The truth would come out, and Seraphine couldn't stop it anymore. I looked out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. It felt like the calm before the storm. But the storm was already here. The end was near. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. The courtroom was eerily silent as I took my seat, my palms sweaty and my heart hammering in my chest. This was it, the day I'd been waiting for. The final showdown. The truth would finally be set free. No more lies, no more pretending. This was the end of Seraphine's reign over me. It was time to take control, to take back what she had stolen. The room was full, everyone watching, waiting for the moment when everything would come to light. Seraphine, sitting across the room, her face pale but her eyes cold with defiance, was about to be exposed. There was no way out for her now. I stood up, my legs shaking, but I refused to let fear take hold. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the words I was about to speak. This wasn't just about the years of suffering I had endured. This wasn't even about revenge. It was about setting things right, about making sure that Seraphine, and everyone else who had been complicit in my misery, faced the consequences of their actions. As I stood in front of the judge, my voice rang clear and steady through the room. "Your Honor, for years I've been silenced. For years I've been manipulated, gaslighted, and poisoned, both literally and emotionally. But today, I'm not here to cry or beg for sympathy. I'm here to expose the truth." I paused, taking a breath. I looked at Seraphine, who was sitting there, still trying to maintain her composure. "You tried to kill me, but you also set me free," I said, the words falling from my lips like a weight lifted from my chest. The courtroom fell into a deep, stunned silence. The room was heavy with the truth, and I could feel the collective gasp from those around me. Seraphine's face shifted, her lips trembling as she tried to hide the shock. It was the first crack in her armor. Seraphine's last attempt to play the victim came in the form of a video she posted online just hours before the trial. She painted herself as the long-suffering sister, the misunderstood one, claiming that all of this had been a mistake. She cried crocodile tears, begging for sympathy, saying, "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I've always been there for my sister. But she's accusing me of things I never did. I just want my family back." I watched that video from my phone before I walked into the courtroom, seething. How dare she? How dare she try to turn the tables on me again? I was done being her victim. I was done letting her get away with everything. At the witness stand, Seraphine, looking visibly shaken now, tried one last desperate plea. "I was just trying to get attention," she yelled, her voice cracking. "This is all just a misunderstanding. I never meant for any of this to happen." But her breakdown felt hollow, a performance she had put on too many times. The tears she shed weren't for me, or for the truth. They were for herself, a last-ditch attempt to salvage her image. I didn't flinch. I had heard it all before. I had lived it for years. And now, I wasn't the one who needed saving. She was. "You didn't make a mistake, Seraphine," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "You made a choice." Seraphine froze, her mouth hanging open as if the words hadn't fully registered in her mind. She knew I was right, but she couldn't admit it, not in front of all these people. The judge sat quietly, weighing everything that had been said. He had heard the testimonies, seen the evidence, and now it was time for the final decision. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, but I didn't let it affect me. And this was my moment. I had fought for this, and I wasn't going to back down now. The judge finally spoke, his voice stern and clear. "In light of the evidence presented today, I find the defendant, Seraphine Williams, guilty of attempted murder, tampering with medication, and poisoning. She is sentenced to 18 years in prison." The words hit me like a wave. 18 years. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. It was justice, finally served after all these years. I stayed in my seat,
My face still, but inside, a wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't over, but it was a victory. As the judge turned to my parents, I couldn't help but feel a sharp pang of disappointment. They had tried to shield Seraphine for so long, protecting her at my expense. Now, it was their turn to face the consequences. Lorraine and Seraphine's father were sentenced to probation for obstruction of justice. The judge made it clear that their role in this was just as damaging, and though they wouldn't face jail time, they would carry the stain of this scandal for the rest of their lives. My lawyer stood next to me, a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "You've won." For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The chains were broken, and I was free. But even as I stood there, a new emotion began to settle inside me. It wasn't happiness or triumph. It was something deeper, something more profound. Seraphine was being led away in handcuffs, her expression twisted with rage. She shot me one last look as she was escorted out, her voice barely a whisper as she hissed, "You won't ever be free. You'll always be broken." I stared at her, my eyes unwavering. "Maybe," I replied, my voice calm, "but I'm alive, and that's more than you'll ever be." As the doors to the courtroom closed behind her, I felt the weight of the past few months finally lift. The tension, the fear, the anger, it all faded into the background. I had made it. I had finally done it. As I left the courtroom, my thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of my phone. I glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number. I answered, my voice cautious. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but calm. "I've been following your case. I think you could help others who've been through what you have." I paused for a moment, taking in the words. "Who is this?" "You'll know soon enough," the voice said, the mystery lingering in the air. "This is just the beginning." And just like that, I knew my fight wasn't over. This had been for me, but it could be for others too. As I walked out into the bright daylight, I felt lighter than I had in years. The storm had passed, but the winds of change were still blowing strong. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was something more, something stronger. The court decision was final. The truth had come out, and the weight I'd carried for years was finally lifted. But as I stepped out of the courtroom, I knew that the real journey was only just beginning. The fight for freedom, for healing, for rebuilding my life, it wasn't over yet. The scars would remain, but they no longer had the power to control me. The road ahead was mine to walk. It wasn't long before I received the letter, the one that would formally sever all ties with my parents. The letter from the court stated that Lorraine and my father were no longer allowed to contact me, even for family emergencies. The cold finality of those words hit harder than I thought they would. I thought I'd feel empty. I thought I'd feel guilty. But as I stared at the letter in my hands, I realized I felt free. I signed the document, knowing that this was the only way I could start over. For so long, I'd been trying to make the pieces fit, trying to maintain some semblance of family, but now, it was clear, I couldn't heal while I was still tied to a toxic past. "I thought I'd feel empty," I whispered to myself, "but I feel free." The relief wasn't immediate, but it came slowly. The next step was clear. I needed to move out. I had lived in that house for far too long, and it was filled with memories of manipulation, betrayal, and pain. I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, away from the past that had haunted me for so long. The apartment was modest, but it was mine. I spent the next few days cleaning and decorating, making it my own, a peaceful sanctuary where I could begin to heal. I hung up pictures, arranged my books, and set up a cozy reading nook by the window. I didn't need much, but what I did need was space to breathe, to grow, and to rebuild. One day, as I sat in the cafe around the corner, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone, I saw something that caught my eye. A flyer posted on the bulletin board for a support group for survivors of family abuse. My heart skipped a beat. I smiled as I read it. "If you've been hurt, you're not alone. Let's talk. Let's heal together." I couldn't help but feel that this was a sign. I had been through so much, But now I had an opportunity to help others. My pain, my suffering, it could be used to heal others. I signed up the next day. As I walked into the first meeting, I felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. But when I saw the group of people gathered around the room, each of them with their own stories, their own pain, but also their own strength, I felt something I hadn't in years, a sense of belonging. I wasn't alone. I began attending the meetings regularly. I became an active member of the group, sharing my story, listening to others, and offering support. And then, as time went on, I became the one to organize the meetings, the one to help others find their voice. During one of the sessions, a woman spoke up, her voice shaky but full of determination. "I thought I was alone, but hearing you all speak made me realize I can fight back too." Those words stuck with me long after the meeting ended. My journey had not just been about my own healing, it was about helping others, lifting them up, and showing them that there was hope, that no matter how deep the pain, there was always a way to rise above it. As I stood there, surrounded by people who had once felt like I did, broken, isolated, powerless, I realized that I wasn't just healing myself. I was helping others heal too. And that, in itself, was more powerful than any victory I could have ever hoped for. I reflected on my journey, on how far I had come, on the people I had met along the way, and the people I had helped. I was finally free, yes. But more than that, I had found purpose. I had found my voice, my strength, and my courage. I still have scars, I thought to myself, but they don't control me. I'm the one who writes my story now. The road to healing was long. It still is. There are days when I feel the weight of it all, days when the past threatens to swallow me whole. But every time that happens, I remind myself of who I am now. I remind myself that I'm no longer the victim. I'm not the one who hides in the shadows, pretending everything is fine while the world around me crumbles. I'm the one who fought for my freedom. I'm the one who stood up, even when I thought I couldn't. And then, as I was preparing for another support group meeting, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen. It was an email from someone I didn't recognize. I opened it, my heart racing. The message was simple but powerful. "Your story saved my daughter's life. Thank you for helping us see the truth before it was too late." I felt the tears welling up in my eyes as I read those words. I had done something good. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my pain had purpose. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was a story that had helped someone else, that had made a difference in the world. And just like that, I knew that everything I had been through, every tear, every moment of doubt, every bit of suffering, it had all led me here, to this moment, to this new chapter. This was just the beginning. Hi, I'm Sienna, and this past Thanksgiving, my mom called just to tell me not to come to dinner. She said the night needed to be formal for my sister's boyfriend's family, like somehow me being a cleaner made me too messy to sit at the same table I helped build. They said it was about appearances, but if that were true, why did they lie to keep me away? Why did they let me clean the house the night before, only to pretend I never existed? Why did my sister take the credit, and my mother write me out of the story entirely? And what happens when the family you've always shown up for finally shows you what you really are to them? Have you ever been erased in plain sight? By your own blood? Because that's what they did. And now, they'll have to hear the whole story. I was parked behind the bakery on Main Street, tucked between the delivery van and a row of trash bins, eating a turkey sandwich I'd made that morning. It was Monday, just 3 days before Thanksgiving, and my phone buzzed like it had been waiting for me to stop chewing. Mom lit up the screen. I hesitated. We weren't the call every day type of family. If Mom was calling, something was up. I wiped my hands on a napkin, cleared my throat, and answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice came smooth, almost too casual. "Sienna, honey, how's work?" I glanced at the mop bucket still dripping in the back of the van. "Fine, just on break." There was a pause, that half second too long. "Well, listen, I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving." My stomach dropped before she even finished the sentence. "Sure," I said slowly. "We're keeping things a little more formal this year.
Callista's bringing Dorian's family, and it's, well, important to her that everything feels polished. My fingers tightened around the phone. I didn't say anything. So, she continued, the words crawling out now. Maybe this year, you take a little break from the dinner. We'll catch up next weekend, maybe brunch. Just us girls. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing. You're asking me not to come, I said flatly. She rushed in like she could cover it up with sugar. It's just the vibe this year, sweetheart. You know how appearances can matter, and… I hung up before she finished. There wasn't going to be any brunch. I sat there in the van for a long while, long enough for the sandwich to go dry in my mouth and for the traffic to thin out. I kept staring at the mop handle like it would offer me a way to clean up what just happened. My mom, Vera, had just uninvited me to Thanksgiving. Because of Callista. Because I didn't match the tone. Because I'm a cleaner. I tried to shake it off. Maybe she didn't mean it like that. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe she really believed it would be easier this way. I leaned back in the seat, the cold leather squeaking against my shirt. I thought about last year's Thanksgiving, Lucy chasing the cat through the dining room, me helping Ginny with the mashed potatoes, Callista laughing a little too loud. I thought about how I always showed up early to help set up, how I stayed late to help clean up. And this year, no seat, no invite, no mention. It wasn't that they forgot me, they deleted me. That night, I got a text from Ginny. Just a simple one-line message. You probably don't want to see this, but I think you should. Attached was a screenshot of the family group chat. It was Callista, center stage as usual. Let's just keep the night clean and elegant, she'd typed. You know Sienna doesn't really match the family image. The air went out of me. I stared at the message until my phone dimmed. It wasn't just about the dinner. It was about how she saw me, how they all saw me, as someone who didn't belong in the photo. I typed back to Ginny, "Thanks for letting me know." Then deleted it. I typed again. "I should have known." Deleted that too. Eventually, I just put the phone down. Back to work. That's how I've always handled pain. You work through it. You don't confront it. You mop the floor. You shut the door. You swallow your pride and smile like it doesn't sting when they call you not the polished one. And somewhere in the back of your head, a little voice whispers, maybe they're right, but not this time. Later that night, I found myself organizing the supply closet at my shop. Everything already had a place, but I reorganized anyway. I was halfway through moving a box of scrub brushes when a memory hit me. Out of nowhere. I was 9 years old. It was after Sunday service. Vera was chatting with a deacon's wife, holding my hand loosely like it didn't quite belong to her. "Oh, Callista's the brain," she laughed. "Sienna's got strong hands, though." "That girl can scrub a bathroom like nobody's business." They laughed. I remember smiling. I thought it was a compliment back then. Now I saw it for what it was. She wasn't proud of me. She was categorizing me, filing me under serviceable. And Callista, she got special. I never stood a chance. By the time I finished cleaning, it was close to midnight. I drove the long way home, took the side streets, no music. When I reached our old neighborhood, I slowed down in front of Vera's house. A large white rental tent had already been pitched in the backyard. Fairy lights flickered along the fence. The kind of setup you'd use to impress people. People like Dorian's parents. I parked half a block down and sat in silence. The curtains were open. Through the window, I saw movement. Someone in heels walked past the dining room table, tossing her hair, laughing. Callista. She looked victorious. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. She hadn't even invited me to help set the table this year, but I knew exactly who had. Ginny had texted me around 10 p.m. that same night. I was still in the van, still staring at the tent lights behind Mom's house, when the message popped up. "Can you come by early tomorrow morning, like 6 a.m.? Help with the setup, but don't tell Mom. She thinks it's all arranged." Of course she did. Vera always thought things arranged themselves. Flowers fell into vases. Silverware aligned itself. Napkins folded on command. It wasn't magic. It was me. Me and women like me. The ones who arrived before the spotlight and left before anyone clapped. I responded with a simple, "I'll be there." Not because I wanted to, not even because I cared. It was muscle memory. 6 o'clock came colder than expected. I pulled up, parking down the block again, as if showing my face might tarnish the aesthetic. Ginny greeted me quietly at the back door in sweats, her hair still wrapped in a towel. She mouthed, "Thank you," like it was a prayer. The kitchen was already pristine because I'd cleaned it 2 days ago. Still, I got to work, dusted the baseboards, re-wiped the counters, arranged the place settings again because apparently last night's setup felt too flat. Ginny handed me a bundle of hydrangeas and said, "She ordered these online, but they came all wrong. Can you?" I nodded. She didn't need to finish the sentence. By 8:15, I'd fluffed and flared every bloom like it owed me a second chance at life. At 8:45, I heard heels clacking on the driveway. Callista's voice filtered in through the open kitchen window. "Oh my God, this lighting is perfect for photos." I didn't turn around, just kept wiping the last wine glass. At 9 o'clock, I left through the side door, slipping past the caterers unloading trays of butternut squash soup and maple glazed turkey bites. No one said goodbye. No one saw me leave. By noon, the first photos hit Facebook. Vera had tagged every relative, every distant cousin, even some people I didn't know were still alive. The caption read, "So proud of my daughter Callista for organizing the perfect Thanksgiving. A new tradition begins." There it was. Not a single mention of me. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the heart icon. Not to like it, but just to see it pulsing. Then I opened the group chat. Callista had dropped a link to a community newsletter interview titled "The Women Behind the Feasts." It featured Vera and Callista standing under the very tent I'd seen from my van. Same fairy lights. Same tablecloths I'd steamed the day before. The interviewer wrote, "Callista Byrne, PR maven and event visionary, led the charge in creating what her mother calls the most elegant Thanksgiving we've ever hosted." My name wasn't there. I read the paragraph again, and then again. I thought about my father's retirement dinner 3 years ago, how I built the photo slideshow, how I arranged the chairs, and how, at the end of the night, Vera raised a glass and said, "Let's thank Callista for putting all this together." She hadn't lifted a finger, neither had I, apparently, because I wasn't even mentioned. It wasn't just that they were proud of her. They needed her to be the face of their success, and they needed me to disappear into the background for that image to stick. I closed the article and scrolled down. There it was again, Callista's voice in text form. Couldn't have pulled this off without support from my amazing family. The comments poured in. "You're incredible! What a blessing you are to your parents. This is magazine-worthy." One photo showed Callista holding a wine glass in front of the dining spread, the same spread I had wiped down, piece by piece, while she was still in bed. I didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, I stood up and opened the hall closet where Mom used to keep the family photo albums. I hadn't looked at them in years, but I remembered which one had the red fabric spine. Flipping through, it confirmed what I already knew. Birthday parties where I was just a hand in the corner of the frame. Vacations where my smile was half-cropped. Christmas mornings where I was either behind the camera or not invited into the shot at all. There was one Thanksgiving photo. Lucy was a toddler, covered in mashed potatoes. Everyone was laughing. Callista had her arms around Vera and Dad. I was in the background, scraping plates. Was I always invisible, or did I let them forget me? I don't know how long I sat there, album open, hands still. Eventually, my phone buzzed. It was a voice message from Ginny. "Hey, just wanted to say thank you again for today. We couldn't have done it without you. Even if no one will say it out loud." I stared at the little waveform bouncing on screen. Then I replayed it. Once, twice, 3 times. And then I deleted it. But what I didn't delete was the truth. And I was ready to speak it, whether they liked it or not. The next morning, I arrived at the shop before the sun came up. There wasn't anything urgent that needed doing, but I couldn't sit in my apartment any longer. The air felt too tight in there, like every wall was whispering, You let them erase you again. I needed motion, needed bleach, needed the weight of a mop handle to ground me. As I unlocked the supply closet, the scent of lemon cleaner hit me like habit. My hands moved on autopilot, refilling bottles, stacking cloths, reorganizing the shelf for the 5th time this week. Still, none of it touched the sting humming in the back of my throat. That sting had a name. It had a face. Callista. She hadn't always been this polished. I remembered a night, about 7 years ago, when she wasn't the darling of Vera's world. When she was just a scared 20-something trying to figure out how to finish college. I was in the kitchen, drying dishes after a long shift. She came in, eyes rimmed red, holding her phone like it had delivered a death sentence. "I can't register for the semester," she said, voice shaking. "I'm short, like, by a lot." I didn't ask how. Didn't question what she'd done with the money Dad gave her. Didn't even hesitate. I pulled out my emergency savings, every last cent I'd stashed in a battered envelope marked brake pads, toothaches, and handed it over. "Pay it," I said. "You've come too far to stop now." She cried, hugged me, said I saved her life. And then, we never spoke of it again. Vera would go on to tell anyone who'd listen that Callista was so determined, so self-sufficient. I was written out of that chapter, just like I was being written out now. 2 days before this year's Thanksgiving, Vera had called late in the evening. I was still wiping down tile in Mrs. Greenberg's guest bathroom when my phone vibrated in my pocket. "Sienna, darling," she began, sweet as syrup. "Would you mind popping by the house tomorrow, just to do a quick, deep clean of the dining room?" I should have seen it then. I said yes. Of course I said yes. When I arrived, the house was quiet. Callista wasn't home yet. Vera was sipping tea, scrolling through her phone. "The rugs are shedding a bit," she said, gesturing without looking up. "And do check the ceiling fan. Last time it was quite dusty." No thank you. No warm smile. No mention of dinner. I scrubbed for 2 hours, on my knees most of the time, listening to the hum of the dishwasher and the tick of Vera's antique wall clock. I told myself I was helping the family, that I was part of it, that I mattered. But when I left, no one acknowledged it. And when she called me the next day to say I wasn't the right fit for a formal dinner, the betrayal landed a little harder. After I closed up shop, I drove to my storage unit. I hadn't been there in months, but something pulled me to it. Inside, buried beneath old photo frames and boxes of tools, was the red fabric family album. I brought it home, spread it out on my kitchen table with a glass of water and a deep breath. Page after page, memory after memory. And in most of them, I was a blur. Sometimes literally, in the background, handing someone a plate. Off to the side, holding Lucy's coat. Cropped at the waist, my face barely visible. Even as a kid, I was usually behind the cake instead of blowing out candles. They didn't just forget me, they'd been practicing forgetting me my whole life. "It's not that I vanished," I murmured aloud. "They never looked my way." By the time the sun set, I had to move. Sitting still had started to feel like suffocating. So I threw on a sweatshirt, grabbed my cleaning caddy, and started on my own apartment. The bathroom was due for a reset. As I scrubbed the tub, tears hit the tile before I could stop them. It wasn't just this week. It was the accumulation of years, of being the helper, never the honoree. The steady support beam they leaned on, until they painted over me with flowers and fairy lights. I sat back against the wall, gloves still on, bleach stinging my eyes even through the mask. And I cried, not loud, not long, just enough. Then I got back up, wiped down the mirror, put the gloves away. "It's just muscle memory now," I told myself. "Get up, clean, shut it down." That was survival. But I was starting to want something more than survival. I dried my hands, walked into the living room, and picked up my phone. Opened the message app, typed, "You're welcome for everything. 2. Callista." My thumb hovered over send. Hovered. And I deleted it. She didn't need those words. She needed the truth. And I still had it. I didn't need to hit send on a text to make my point. Some messages are better delivered by hand. At 6:02 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, I pulled up 3 houses down from Vera's, just as the frost was settling over the lawns and the rental tent in her backyard shimmered under a pale layer of morning ice. The block was still asleep. Not a single curtain shifted. No one was watching. I stepped out of my car, slid the envelope into my coat pocket, and walked down the sidewalk like I belonged there, because for decades I did. For years, I had hauled bags of groceries up this porch, fixed loose door handles, helped rehang crooked family portraits. If anyone had the right to stand at that back door, it was me. But I didn't knock. Instead, I bent down beside the old ceramic flower pot Vera still kept near the patio, the one shaped like a swan, chipped on the beak. Tucked beneath it, I slid the envelope into place and whispered, "Happy Thanksgiving." Inside the envelope was a printed copy of an email I had sent Vera nearly a month ago. The subject line had read, "Urgent, dining room ceiling fixture loose again." The body of the message listed the date I first noticed the wobble, the contractor's recommendation to repair it immediately, and Vera's reply, which read simply, "Not now. I'll have Callista's boyfriend take a look at it." The second item in the envelope was a sticky note. It said, "Ignored systems collapse. No signature, no threat, just consequence." I didn't linger. I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove to my shop, unlocked the front door, and started reorganizing the microfiber cloths in the storage cabinet, not because they needed it, but because my hands needed to stay busy. By 7:15, my phone buzzed. Ginny. This time, not with a text, a voice memo. I hesitated before pressing play. "Sienna," she began, her voice low. "Look, I didn't want to say anything before, but you should know how Mom talks when you're not around." Pause. "She told me last night that Callista was nervous about you coming, said you might embarrass the family, that you don't really fit the image we're trying to present to Dorian's parents." There was more. She said, and I quote, "Sienna always means well, but she brings a kind of heaviness. We can't have her ruin the night just by being there." I didn't blink, didn't even flinch. I just reached for my coffee and took a long sip. "She's afraid of the truth," Ginny's voice continued. "And I've started recording some of their calls. I don't know what they think they're protecting, but you're not crazy." It should have shocked me. It didn't. This wasn't new. I'd been warning them my whole life. I warned them when Dad wanted to invest in that shady real estate scheme, and Vera said I was just jealous of Callista's boyfriend's big dreams. 2 years later, they lost $14,000. I warned them when Lucy started showing signs of hearing trouble, and they brushed it off as selective toddler attention. Turned out she had a mild auditory processing delay that delayed her learning to read. I warned them about the termites in the baseboards, the rust in the old pipes, even the way Aunt Lillian's boyfriend looked at Ginny during Christmas Eve 2015. And every single time, "Sienna, stop being dramatic. You worry too much. You always focus on what's wrong." They said I was the heavy one, but I wasn't heavy, I was honest, and people like Vera don't reward honesty. They silence it. By 9:30 a.m., I was still alone in the shop, folding rags, when I realized something inside me had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. I didn't want back in. I didn't want the seat at the table anymore. I didn't need them to see me, or applaud me, or even remember what I did. I just wanted them to see the truth, and if they didn't, let them live with the fallout. By 10:15, the sky had brightened into a soft, indifferent gray. The streets were starting to fill with traffic, pickup trucks with bundled-up dads hauling pies, minivans stuffed with kids and casseroles. Somewhere, I knew Vera's tent was glowing with LED lights, and Callista was probably already posing for pre-dinner photos in a dress I had never seen her wear. I walked outside the shop and locked up early, didn't bother with errands, didn't check my email. I drove back to my apartment, put on an old sweatshirt, and sat quietly with a sandwich I didn't feel like eating. My phone buzzed again. Ginny. This time, it was a text. "If you ever decide to speak, I'll back you up." I stared at the message, feeling nothing and everything all at once. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation, but not the kind Vera ever offered me. This one had no dress code, no curated image, just truth. And finally, I was ready to let it in. By that evening, the house was full, but not one of them knew what was about to fall apart. Meanwhile, my apartment was still. No music, no phone calls, just me, a folding tray table, and a plastic container of grocery store mac and cheese I'd reheated twice. The silence didn't ache the way it used to. For once, I didn't feel left behind. I felt exempt. I'd spent too many holidays pushing gravy boats across linen-covered tables while pretending not to hear the backhanded comments. Well, at least Sienna's handy. Or, she may not be ambitious, but she's always available. I used to swallow them whole like warm stuffing, hoping the right silence might win me a seat at their emotional table. Not this year. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders tighter and leaned back on the couch. The city lights outside blinked soft and indifferent. Somewhere out there, under that canopy of artificial stars, Vera's voice was probably rising just slightly, welcoming Dorian's parents with perfectly scripted charm. Callista would be laughing, hair done just right, flashing those overly rehearsed dimples she inherited from no one in particular. And I had a warm meal, a clean space, and most of all, clarity. After finishing my small dinner, I rinsed the container, put it in the drying rack, and opened the garage door to grab a few files I'd stored away weeks ago. That's when I saw the box, tucked behind old holiday decorations and a cracked plastic snow shovel. The box was plain, light wood, slightly warped from years of Chicago moisture, but I recognized the handwriting scrawled on top. Nana's Garden Notes. I pulled it out, dusted it off, and carried it back inside. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were packets of seeds, a few dried flower petals pressed between yellowing notebook pages, and a letter I didn't remember ever reading. "Let them call you small," it began in her unmistakable cursive. "They've never seen how far roots can grow underground." I sat there for a moment, just breathing. Beneath the letter was a faded Polaroid. Me at 6 years old, squatting beside her in the garden, both of us covered in dirt, hands full of weeds. Nana's arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders, her face turned to me, not the camera. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Nana had always seen me, not for what I did, but for who I was. Quiet, capable, observant. She never mistook that for weakness. I placed the letter on the coffee table and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Then, my phone buzzed again. It was a voice note from Lucy. I blinked in surprise. Callista's daughter wasn't allowed a phone of her own, but she sometimes used her mom's tablet for schoolwork. I tapped play, expecting maybe a happy Thanksgiving or a funny story about the turkey. But it wasn't that. It was her little voice, soft and hesitant. "Hi, Dee Dee," she whispered, using the name she gave me herself when she couldn't say Sienna as a toddler. "I just wanted to tell you something." There was a pause. "Mom says you don't belong with us anymore, but I think you're the kindest person I know. You cleaned my room better than anyone. And I told my teacher I want to be like you when I grow up." My hand covered my mouth. I didn't cry from pain. For once, I cried from love. Lucy didn't know she'd just thrown a rope into a well I thought I'd filled with cement. I sat still for a long time, listening to that voice note on loop. I didn't delete this one. I saved it to a protected folder, backed it up, and renamed it simply, Truth. When I finally set the phone down, I opened a new message and typed a single line to Vera. "I don't need to be invited, but don't lie and say I was never there." No greeting, no punctuation. I hit send and didn't wait for a reply, because I wasn't seeking her validation anymore, but I wasn't letting her rewrite the story either. I stood up, walked over to my printer, and started what felt like a different kind of cleaning. Truth documentation. First, the original repair warning I'd sent about the chandelier, the one they ignored. Next, the email thread with Callista from years ago when she asked for help with tuition. Her reply, "I'll pay you back when I can, but I can't register without you."
Then, the invoice copies from the cleaning company for every time I donated services for family events, marked paid, Cyril sounds. I added screenshots of texts from Vera and Callista praising my help, back when it was convenient. Each document was printed in duplicate. I began organizing them into a folder labeled, simply, Receipts. This wasn't revenge. This was my insurance policy. Because if Vera or Callista ever dared to go public with their fiction, I'd have the truth, ready, factual, irrefutable. I slid the final page into its sleeve and paused. There was one more thing I needed to include. A summary, not a dramatic essay, just one line. I uncapped a pen and wrote, "If I'm going to be erased, let me at least write the ending myself." I closed the folder, tucked it into my work bag, and leaned back on the couch. My phone buzzed once more. A text from Ginny. Just 3 words. They just sat down. The lights went out just as the turkey hit the table. 1 second, the room glowed with soft, curated warmth, the perfect mix of overhead LEDs and strategically placed sconces. And the next, complete darkness swallowed the smiles. Gasps erupted around the table. A knife clattered to a plate. Someone let out a nervous chuckle, the kind that always precedes panic at fancy events. Then came the high-pitched scream of a child, maybe one of Dorian's nieces. But the real sound, the one that would echo in their heads far longer than any malfunction, was the groaning creak overhead. It gave just enough warning for the chandelier to announce its exit. With a final electric buzz and a spark that lit the edges of the ceiling, the heavy iron fixture detached, crashing down onto the floor in an explosion of crystal and brass. Screams followed, chairs shoved backward. A piece of glass sliced through the tablecloth, carrots scattered like shrapnel. The roasted turkey lay half-draped in gravy, a comical crown of disaster. Callista stood frozen mid-toast, her wineglass still half-raised. Dorian's mother clutched her pearls. His father muttered, "Jesus." In the kitchen, alarms blared, oven timers, security systems, maybe even the fridge protesting its sudden silence. The room reeked of burnt sugar and fear. Vera was the first to speak. "Everyone, it's fine," she yelled, holding up both hands. "Just a little power surge. Happens in older homes." But no one believed her. Not really, because Ginny was already on her feet, pale and shaking. She glanced at the floor where the chandelier had landed and whispered, "She warned you. Sienna warned you about that fixture." Callista whipped her head around. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Ginny said, louder now. "Sienna told Mom weeks ago that thing was loose. You brushed her off, called her dramatic." Vera's voice rose, sharp. "That's enough, Ginny." But Ginny wasn't done. She pointed at the melted candle wax near the fallen turkey. "She told you to check the wiring. She begged you to listen." And then a server slipped. The rug, embroidered, antique, overly decorative, had folded at the edge. The woman's tray flew upward, crashing into the buffet table. Mashed potatoes slid across the hardwood like some grotesque art installation. In the chaos, Callista reached for Dorian, but he didn't take her hand. Instead, he said quietly, "Why didn't anyone fix this?" Vera laughed. Too forced, too rehearsed. "Oh, you know this old place. It always acts up when the weather shifts." "No," Dorian said, flatly. "That's not what Ginny just said." An icy silence followed. Then the hum of phones buzzing and guests murmuring about exits and flashlights and calling an Uber early. Back at my apartment, I sat in peace. Jazz played softly from the old radio in my kitchen. The candles I'd lit an hour earlier flickered gently against the wall, casting familiar shadows across the floor. Everything in my space was grounded, steady. No flickers, no sparks, just truth. I opened my laptop, clicked into my email draft folder, and hovered over the subject line. "If you're wondering what went wrong tonight." The body of the message was already formatted, attachments numbered, timestamps included. Invoice for my services, never paid. Repair requests, ignored. Photos of the chandelier weeks prior, visibly loose. Screenshots of texts from Vera calling me a liability, and too plain. An audio file Ginny had forwarded of Callista saying, "She can clean, but she doesn't belong at our table." I didn't add anything more. I just hit send. It went to every family member in our contact chain, including Aunt Marta in Arizona, who hadn't spoken to anyone since 2019, and Uncle Lee, who always replied with an accidental emoji. As I closed the laptop, my phone vibrated violently. Ginny was first. A simple text. "You really did it." Then more rolled in. "Is this real? Did she really say all that? Why didn't anyone stop them?" I didn't answer any of them. I poured myself a glass of water and stretched out on the couch, letting the quiet sit beside me like an old friend. Somewhere, Callista was probably scrambling. Somewhere, Vera was probably spinning a new version of the story. And right on cue, a filtered photo hit Facebook. Callista, smile tight, holding a slice of pie. Caption: "Grateful, despite the chaos. Family always finds its way back to love." No mention of the broken chandelier, no mention of the mass exodus, just perfectly cropped denial. I didn't respond, didn't comment, didn't need to. The email was already doing the work for me. Then, a call. "Dorian." I let it ring. Once, twice, 5 times. Finally, I picked up. "Are you calling to ask if it's true?" I said calmly. "Or to apologize for being part of it?" There was a long pause on the other end. He didn't answer, and I didn't wait. He didn't answer, and I didn't wait. I let the line go dead and turned the phone face down on the coffee table. My tea had gone cold. I didn't bother reheating it. There was no comfort left in warmth when the truth had already burned through everything. The next morning, I opened my phone and did what I promised myself I wouldn't. I checked Callista's socials. There it was, the spin. A polished photo of her holding Lucy in one arm, a perfectly sliced pie in the other. The caption read, "Grateful despite the chaos. Family always finds its way." A dozen comments already. "You're a rock, Callista. This is how you handle pressure with grace." Total inspiration. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. The Callista method. Deny, deflect, decorate. Sprinkle enough sparkle over a mess and hope no one looks underneath. She had done it again. And this time, she had almost gotten away with it. Until Ginny texted. It was just one line. "I think it's time." Attached was an audio file. I plugged in my headphones, took a deep breath, and pressed play. Vera's voice came first, sharp and clipped. "I don't want them seeing her in that uniform, scrubbing or smiling. It'll undo everything Callista's worked for." Callista responded, more hesitant than I expected. "Do you think it's too obvious not to invite her?" Vera's laugh was low and deliberate. "No, it's strategic. We need everything to look elevated. She doesn't match that image." Then silence, just long enough for the truth to settle in. I didn't react right away. I didn't throw my phone or cry or scream. I just sat back in the chair and closed my eyes. So there it was, finally, on tape. Proof that it was never about a scheduling mix-up, never about too many guests or a misunderstanding. They'd chosen to erase me, on purpose, and this time they'd recorded the plan. By early afternoon, I had the file backed up in 3 places, one of which was a secure folder marked "For Later" in my work email. The other copy I sent to myself on a burner Gmail just in case things got ugly. Ginny texted again. "He's here." I didn't need to ask who she meant. Dorian. Lucy had spent the night at Ginny's house after the dinner debacle, and apparently, Callista had been too frazzled to go pick her up herself. So she sent Dorian. And he walked into more than just a pickup. At first, Ginny said, she offered him coffee. Nothing formal, just friendly. Then Lucy ran into the room, tablet in hand. "Mommy said Dee Dee isn't coming back ever," she blurted, "but I hope she does." That's when Dorian asked questions, and Ginny, God bless her, pressed play. I imagined it as clearly as if I were there. The living room quiet, Ginny clicking the button. The silence afterward. He didn't speak for a long time. Then softly, he asked, "That's her sister?" Ginny nodded. "She's the one who cleaned the whole house. She was the one who warned them. She's the one they didn't even let show up." Dorian sat down, stunned. According to Ginny,
He didn't say much after that. Just stared at the carpet like it might rearrange itself to make the shame easier to look at. She handed him her phone again. "Read this," she said. It was my email, the one I'd sent the night before with every receipt attached. He read it all the way through. Didn't defend Callista, didn't defend Vera, didn't offer excuses. He just nodded and said, "She deserved better." And then he left. By the time I got the update, I was already back at my shop. I had an appointment to deep clean a dental office the next morning and needed to prep the supplies. The radio played quietly in the background, some smooth blues, and the sun had already dipped below the roofline. My phone buzzed again, a message request, from Dorian. "You deserved better. I see that now." I stared at it, let it breathe on the screen for a while. Then I whispered aloud to myself, "Then why did you wait until the room collapsed?" It wasn't anger. It wasn't even bitterness. It was something older, deeper, a knowing. Because that's how it always went, didn't it? People like me only become visible after the damage is done, after the house falls down, after the chandelier shatters, after the truth has made a mess of the linens. Then they remember we existed. Then they say, "You were right," but never when it mattered. Not when we were offering warnings. Not when we were cleaning behind their messes. Not when we were begging them to see us. They only hear us when the silence gets loud enough to shake the floor. Callista's downfall had begun. It started slow. One brand quietly removed their collaboration post from her profile. Then a local boutique unfollowed her on Instagram. By the end of the day, a longtime client had emailed her with a vague but firm statement. "Given the recent revelations, we feel your current public image no longer aligns with our brand values. Effective immediately, we'll be terminating the contract." Ouch, but well earned. She had built her entire image on being the polished daughter, the face of the family, the one who never cracked. Now the cracks were showing, and no amount of retouching could hide them. The room wasn't the only thing about to collapse. By Friday morning, Vera had shifted into full defense mode. Not that I was surprised. Her playbook hadn't changed in decades, only the audience had. It began with a Facebook post. Long, perfectly punctuated. Just the right balance of fragile and firm. It was the tone she used best. Gentle martyrdom. The same tone that worked wonders on church committees, PTA boards, and local charity events. "It's heartbreaking," she wrote, "when families turn on each other, not in private but publicly, for attention and pity. Some people would rather destroy what we've built than contribute to it. But I believe in grace, and I believe in rising above." She didn't use my name. She didn't have to. Within minutes, Callista had shared the post, captioned with an image of clasped hands and, "Thank you, Mom, for always protecting us, even when it's hard." Us. That tiny word carried the weight of an entire rewrite, as if I hadn't been family too, as if I hadn't once sat at the same tables, wrapped the same gifts, scrubbed the same floors after their glittering parties. I didn't respond. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't forward it to Ginny or even file it into my digital evidence folder. I just sipped my tea and waited, because I knew exactly what was coming. By noon, the comments had started. Many were predictable. Loyalists from Vera's inner circle. Women who owed her favors or were too afraid of losing their seat at her curated table. One woman from her church wrote, "You've always been the bigger person, Vera. Don't let bitterness touch your heart." Another chimed in with, "True grace shines brightest under pressure. We see you." But then the thread slowed and shifted. Cracks began to form. It started with my cousin Darren. Quiet, introverted, mostly absent from social media. He hadn't commented on a family post in years, but there he was, writing. Didn't Sienna help take care of Uncle Bill during chemo? I'm pretty sure she drove him to appointments for months. Never asked for anything. Then someone else. I remember Sienna doing yard work for Mrs. Halberd during that brutal snowstorm, while everyone else was posting from Florida. Suddenly, the algorithm was no longer working in Vera's favor. The thread slowed again. It then surged forward, this time from names I didn't recognize. And then it landed, a comment from Mrs. Halberd herself. No filters, no emojis,
just the kind of clarity that burns through fog. "Let me tell you something about this drama maker you all seem so quick to judge," she began. "Last winter I couldn't walk, hip surgery, no local family, no way to get the snow cleared. You know who showed up at 6:45 every morning with a shovel and thermos of coffee? Sienna. You know who brought me soup, changed light bulbs, and helped me bathe my dog when I couldn't bend over? Sienna. Not for money, not for attention, just because it was the right thing to do." She ended with, "If this family is embarrassed by her, that says more about them than it does about her." No hashtags, no theatrics, just truth, typed quietly in a comment box. I stared at the screen, heart thudding, slow, sure, certain, and I still didn't comment, didn't press like, didn't drop in a quote tweet or meme. I let it breathe, let it speak for itself, let Vera sit with the slow unraveling of a story she could no longer edit. That afternoon, I took a walk. Around the block, past the florist where Dad used to buy last-minute anniversary roses, past the old barber shop where he once took Dorian and me for matching haircuts, past the corner diner where Callista had met Dorian for their second date, though that story changed depending on who she was telling it to. All still standing. Unlike her reputation, the air was brisk, but not biting. The sky hung low and heavy, the color of wet cement. It didn't bother me. That kind of chill no longer pierced me the way it once did. I'd grown something warmer inside now. That evening, as lights flickered on across the city, windows glowing like embers in high-rise stacks, my phone buzzed, a news alert from a PR watchdog account I followed. Breaking. Brand partnership between Callista Byrne and Luxe Glow. Beauty quietly terminated. No public statement issued. I scrolled further. Another post, this time from a boutique PR agency's Instagram story. "We hold ourselves to the highest ethical standards, both publicly and privately." They didn't tag her. They didn't have to. Curious, I checked Callista's profile. Several posts were gone, archived or deleted. Others had limited comments now. One image remained at the top of her feed. Thanksgiving. Crisp filters. Posed smiles. But something had changed. Lucy wasn't in the photo anymore. Dorian's profile looked different too. The couple photos had vanished. His grid now read like a man reclaiming a version of himself that had never existed within the Byrne holiday marketing machine. No explanation, no joint statement, just digital erasure. Fitting. By Saturday, I'd heard from Ginny, Mrs. Halbert again, and 3 cousins I hadn't spoken to since the rehearsal dinner of someone else's wedding. None of them offered apologies. None of them tried to fix the past. Instead, they offered stories. Small, warm, unpolished memories. Moments that confirmed what I'd wondered all along. Someone had seen me, even if it took them too long to say so. That morning, I brewed coffee and opened my inbox. There it was, an envelope from the Naperville Business Women's Association. Inside, a letter on soft cream paper, formal but not cold. "We're pleased to inform you that you've been nominated by your clients for the 2025 Local Impact Award. This nomination recognizes your commitment to integrity, community care, and leadership in small business." I didn't frame it, didn't tweet it. I simply folded the letter and placed it on the kitchen table next to my now cold coffee. I sat in the quiet for a long while. No spotlight, no audience, just a smile. Soft, small, certain. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. But even with justice, even with vindication, healing wasn't instant. It was still unfolding, quietly, like morning light on a cloudy day. Unhurried, unwavering. And that was enough. Even with justice, real, documented, undeniable, healing wasn't instant. No court order, no public reckoning, no whispered apology in the dark could change that. Healing, I was learning, wasn't a flash of triumph or a single decision. It was slower, quieter. It settled into the corners of your life, often when you weren't looking. In my new apartment, it arrived like dust on the windowsill, inevitable, light, and no longer choking. I let it stay, let it collect for a little while before sweeping it away with a soft cloth and open windows. It didn't bother me anymore.
I'd stopped expecting stillness to mean something was wrong. The local Impact Award gala had come and gone without me. I'd RSVP'd with a polite decline, asked them to mail the certificate. The woman on the phone from the Naperville Business Women's Association had paused when I explained why. "I already know my worth," I said gently. "I don't need a stage to validate it." There was a breath of surprise on the other end, then she chuckled, genuine, warm. "Well," she replied, "that's the most honest thing I've heard all week." The envelope arrived 2 days later. No fanfare, just heavy stock paper, a seal embossed in gold, and my name printed clearly in bold serif font. I didn't frame it. I didn't post about it. I slipped it into the drawer in my desk, the one where I kept Nana's note and a faded copy of the email I'd once sent to my family, the message that had changed everything. Some things you don't keep to show, you keep them to remember. That same week, I got a call from the university where Dorian worked. A woman introduced herself as the facilities director. Her voice was professional, confident, but not cold. "I was referred to your company," she said, "by someone who deeply respects your standards." She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. "I hope this doesn't sound transactional," she added, "but we could really use your eye for detail here. Your reputation speaks for itself." I sat for a moment in the quiet of my office, letting the weight of her words settle. Then I smiled. I'd be honored to help. I didn't mention the irony that this same campus had once hosted Callista's fundraising brunches, the ones I'd helped clean up after, unnoticed, invisible, beneath the clink of wine glasses and the murmur of curated conversations. Now I'd return, not as staff, as owner. A few days later, I moved again. Nothing dramatic, just across town, to a one-bedroom apartment tucked against a row of trees. The balcony faced east, catching the morning sun in long golden streaks across the floor. It wasn't pristine. The carpet had a stain near the bedroom door I couldn't get out, and the stove ran slightly hot on one side. But it was mine, paid for, earned, claimed. Lucy helped me unpack. Well, helped might be a stretch. Mostly she danced around in bubble-wrap booties, declaring herself commander of the packing planet, while I hauled kitchen boxes from one counter to another. She made me laugh, real laughs, the kind that start in your chest and work their way up, unannounced and unstoppable, not the kind that sneak up behind sorrow, the kind that shove it aside, elbowing joy to the front. "You're my favorite grown-up," she declared at one point, arms tight around my waist while I tried to figure out where the teapot should go. I kissed the top of her head. "I'll take that," I whispered, "over any award, any day." That night, we had a small dinner. Nothing extravagant, just a simple table set for 4, me, Lucy, Ginny, and Mrs. Halberd. Ginny brought roasted chicken with lemon and thyme. Mrs. Halberd baked a pear pie that made the whole apartment smell like autumn. Lucy made place cards out of folded paper towels and crayons, each name misspelled in the most endearing way possible. Mine read, Dee Dee the Strong. We didn't trade gossip. We didn't dissect headlines. We shared real stories, some soft, some sharp. We joked, and we listened. At one point, Ginny lifted her glass and said, "To quiet women with loud integrity." We clinked glasses gently. No one cried, but we all softened. After dinner, Lucy played with the small terrier Mrs. Halberd had brought along. "He needed a night out too," she had said with mock seriousness. Ginny and I slipped into the kitchen to tackle the dishes. "You know they're watching, right?" Ginny asked as she handed me a wet plate. "Vera," I said. "And Callista." I nodded, rinsing. "Let them." She smiled, not triumphant, just knowing. "You didn't just survive this, Sienna. You outgrew it." The next morning, a card arrived. White envelope. Familiar handwriting. I sat on the edge of the couch and opened it slowly. Inside. "We miss you. Let's talk. Mom." No apology, no reflection, just a vague invitation. I folded the card neatly and slid it into the drawer beside the others, beside Nana's note, which read in her worn script, "Let them call you small. They've never seen how far roots can grow underground." Maybe one day I'd answer, but not today. That afternoon, I walked to the small patch of grass behind the apartment complex. The soil was soft, dark, and ready. I dug a hole and planted a young tree there. A sugar maple, the same kind that used to stand tall in Nana's yard. Every fall, its leaves would turn gold and spill across the garden like coins from the sky. I patted the soil down with my hands, wiped my palms on my jeans, and sat on the back step to watch it sway. Growth doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand applause. It just happens. Quietly, patiently, invisibly, until one day, it's undeniable. You don't always get the apology, I whispered. But sometimes, growth is enough. From inside, I heard quick footsteps on tile. Then Lucy's bright voice. "Di! You forgot dessert!" I smiled, fully, without hesitation. "I'm coming," I called back, already standing. And for the first time in a long, long time, I meant it. Sometimes, family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who tells the truth, and who refuses to let silence define them. Have you ever had to walk away from people who claim to love you, just to finally respect yourself? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below, and let's talk. And if this one hit home, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that speak to the quiet strength inside us all.